Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting for Tuesday, April 10th. We are privileged to be meeting on the territory of the Squamish Nation. I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Ted, seconded by Peter. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We've got committee meeting minutes from March 27th. Motion to approve. Moved by Doug, seconded by Patty. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to business. We've got a pretty full agenda, so I'll just ask council to keep your questions pointed to the point so we can get through everyone. Some decisions we've got today to make and some direction staff is seeking from us. So with that, I'll hand it over to Christine and Anushka.
Thank you. Good morning, Anushka, Riverin Financial Analyst. And
Christine Mathews, Chief Financial Officer.
We are here today to talk about tax rate, and that's our last step in the 2018 financial planning process. Today, we will review the revised roll, the current assumption, the port tax rate, the business tax ratio, and we will be seeking direction from the committee for taxation rates. We will also talk about the current correspondence, for the port property tax act repeal. And yeah, I need more coffee. We'll have a quick debrief on the financial process, and Christine will update us on the accumulated surplus. Let's start with the revised roll. As we suspected, the revised roll came in a little lower than the completed roll. The major differences are in residential. There was an appeal for non-profit affordable housing, which is 2.1 million out of the 9.6 million difference. We don't know what the other 7 million is, but we can make the assumption that is it's homeowner that have appealed their assessment. The difference for port is just because of the assumption we made for the port property improvement, so it's just the difference between our assumption and the actual. So let's just review the assumption for the current scenario. So we kept all the ratios the same as 2017. The rate for the port in 2017 were 25 and 22.5 for the new improvement. In 2018, there's no levy for the library, and the tax revenue that is required is $27.7 million. Here's the overview of the effect on the tax rate and ratio. If that table is too small on the screen, that's the first page of the handout is the same table. There's no.
Just a reminder, this is the comparison of averages across British Columbia, and we were only able to compare last year's average because, of course, every municipality is in the process now of building their tax rates for 2018. So this compares our proposed 2018, if we were to keep everything the same as last year, to the 2017 averages across BC.
Thank you. Susan? Thanks. Did you do a comparison taking out Vancouver or larger cities?
The only one we pull out is Oak Bay because it has a very distorted dynamic in its assessment rate regarding farmland. So we pulled that one out, but everything else we consider to be part of the big mix. There's a lot of municipalities in here, so we consider it to be reasonable to average them all.
The large cities and comparing it to
no, we've just done a
cities?
full across the board, all BC municipalities with the exception of Oak Bay.
Doug?
So the port major industry, but ports in the province generally are capped at 27.5. I know we're a little bit under. And the BC average is 32. So that number
It's all major industry.
it's significantly major industry.
It's all major industry,
All
including
major.
ports.
Well, exactly.
He's talking about the percentage
But
of
if you take out the port part and you try to just look at the other major industry, it's kind of a higher number. So I guess, you know, we're dealing with one major industry, which happens to be a port. So it kind of skews it the other way a little bit. I mean, we're way under, but that's because it's a port, not because of major industry.
Yes, through the chair, point taken. We are comparing this to all major industries. Obviously, that might be a disservice to the port in terms of that. Obviously, every other port is at 27 or lower, 27.5 or lower.
Okay.
I thought we had separated those out last year so that we had a major industry rate, even though we don't have them in that class at the moment. We had a separate major industry rate and a port rate, so just wondering why it's in one thing now.
Thank you. Through the chair, we will do that when we come to the tax rate bylaw, and last year council directed us to choose the BC average essentially as that posted port rate, or posted, sorry, major industry rate. We can do the same this year. It's just we don't have any other major industry at this time. And it's hard enough, we have a lot of columns already, it's hard to get this information up and on the screen for everyone to see.
Well, I'm just, you know, we potentially are going to have a major industry very soon, so we want to make sure we're putting our minds to that. And so I think it'd be worthwhile having it separated out.
Great, okay.
Any other questions? Let's keep going.
Can I also add that we also get a grant for the province for the port, which is an extra revenue that's not showing on there. The next slide is, if it's too small again, it's the second page in the handout. And that's just like example of tax impact using average assessment and with all the same ratio and rates, again, like all the same assumption. What we've added this year, the strata, so we can observe that there's the same increase in the strata that we've observed like in Vancouver and other municipalities. It's like, I just want to point out that this is like, again, average and it's not reflection of actual properties, but we will look at that like next. You can also know that there's quite a significant increase in business and other class 6. So at the moment, the effective tax rate is like 3.08.
And I believe before, when we came through at the completed roll, it was around 2.77, correct? So there has been some, with the assessment value going down, there has been a little bit of a movement up in our, what we consider to be the effective increase in taxes in general across all classes.
So we're at 3.08. Okay, Patty, did you have a question?
Yeah, is there any, like that's a significant increase in the business and other, what's the explanation there?
Sure, we can talk about, we actually have some slides on business later. Would you like it right
That's
there?
fine.
Is that okay?
Done?
Well, I was just going to point out it's the assessment value that jumped.
Yeah.
That was a function of the assessment.
Question?
Yeah, being assessed at, the effect of being assessed at residential rates, basically. It's when you are underneath high cost residential and the residential scoots up, it definitely affects your business taxes.
Correct.
Okay, let's move on.
Here's some year-over-year comparison on actual single-family houses.
So the point of this slide is that, as we mentioned, sometimes it's hard on BC averages. We literally, for that previous table, we literally take the full assessment base, divide it by the number of folios. And as probably most of you are aware, that doesn't necessarily represent each property, and it doesn't give you any indication of what's going on per neighborhood. So what we do is we pull out what we'll call a representative property in each of the neighborhoods to talk about how some of those, some neighborhoods might be skewed or impacted more or less than others. The key here to remember is if you're honing in on percentages, remember also that when the base is lower, so when we're looking at properties that maybe have a lower assessment base to begin with, a rise for them of the same or equivalent rate in a higher priced neighborhood would have a much more significant percentage. So it's just important that as we look at these stats, we understand.
It's a bit strange to me that North Yards is higher than
Well, the
the
most expensive.
most expensive neighborhood, but there's,
Again, it's all about averages, right? So if there's something expensive in that, I'm trying to think of where North Yards, if it would include some of those major properties, right? They can really skew if they don't have a lot of properties, they don't have a lot of residential, and they have a couple higher end ones. It can really skew. That's what we're saying. Averages are really bizarre. So.
That's just like one property.
And which
Yeah.
property was that one? Because that wasn't in the
Well, that'll be a development property.
Yeah, one of the new ones going in.
But this single family.
Yeah.
but these are single family.
Yeah.
And
Sorry,
there's just not a lot of high-end single family.
would that be the new one?
They chose one of the big
Doreen?
properties.
Doreen gave it? Yeah, let's take that one out. I think it's a bit of an outlier for
Yeah.
sure, and I think it's
I think
one of
it's
those
all-
major properties. It
I
could
think
be.
the downtown and North Yards is reversed, because
No.
are you sure?
Well, it's like the year-over-year increase to that. There
Yeah,
hasn't
that's
been
an
much
increase.
change there.
Just seems like an anomaly.
Most of the downtown properties were
Yeah,
assessed
it's
in the
it's
middle.
interesting, there's just, it's hard to, living in that neighborhood, it's hard to imagine which properties we're talking about. Doug?
Well, the only thing I can think of, just because I used to practice in this area, it's not an assessment, but when you have a large development property that is now zoned for single family, or for residential rather, such as one of the development sites in Government Road, it doesn't, it's still one tax roll until the buildings are built and then divided up into separate tax rolls. So we're probably looking at the entire lot.
So the DAU lot is being assessed.
She's just giving
Yeah.
it.
Or the target one,
That could be
for example.
No, that's a house.
Wait, sorry.
But for the,
Yeah.
I mean, with the purposes of a schedule like this, we need to be comparing apples to apples, that's.
Well, and the key here is really about how did the assessment change and how did the tax rate change. That's really what we're trying to recognize here, is that neighborhoods do move differently. But I would concur that that one's probably a bit of an outlier, so our apologies for that, because it probably is not representative of the average in that area.
And it is odd, everybody I know in the downtown that owns a 50, we all own the exact same lot, and we were all assessed at the same rate, and we were all assessed at over $1 million. So 700 seems incredibly low. There is one property that sold without a house on it, maybe that.
The first four that we pick, we've been using for the last 4 to 5 years. So that is that particular property, and it's been used. The far right one is a new one, the North Yards. But the other ones are properties that we have been following for 2 to 3 years now.
Have you?
And we understand that they have not had any major reno or anything changed to them, right? So
All of Third Avenue was purchased, and all of those prices have affected our downtown assessment. And so it'd be appropriate, because that's an entire street of houses, to use something that's either on Third or Fourth Avenue. Because all of our properties are assessed and zoned in the exact same way, so it seems
Fair enough.
really low.
honestly, we just, a couple years ago, tried to identify properties that we knew had not had any renovations. That's not necessarily information that's available to us unless we use people's homes that work for us or that we know, or because we know they haven't been renovated and that there's been no other factors influencing that property's value beyond market. Okay.
Is that your hand up?
No, sorry, scratching.
Okay.
So this year we're also, like, we all, excuse me, wanted to present like some strata property. So like keep in mind too, like I don't live in town and I just look at numbers that are all numbers to me. So like I'm not picking on like certain property to get the numbers to say something. So it's just like to represent like the move into different neighborhood.
Pretty well everything we build now on a residential basis is strata. So that's why we thought it was important to bring in this component, and because also, again, the strata has been moving up pretty rapidly in the big assessment base. You can see the single families didn't move that much this year, but boy, the strata is, because now that's the affordable housing in town, right? So it's being pressured, and that's really the picture we're trying to paint here, is that regardless, within the class 1, you'll see some properties won't see very much tax, some properties will. And that's the joy of taxation, and that's the hard part of being a council trying to make these decisions, is that this really is a statistics game, and each property is going to be impacted differently.
So let's have a look at businesses. You can notice that the major increase was in the downtown area, and everywhere else it kind of moved with the average.
There are definitely some significant changes for the downtown core, and you would have remembered a correspondence during the financial planning process from a particular business suggesting this was a problem, so we investigated that further. We have talked to BC Assessment and our own planning departments, and to Councillor Chappelle's point, it is really being driven by that mixed use component. Really, we've downzoned Cleveland, but the Cleveland has 3 comparatives that are substantial increases in value, and unfortunately that's impacting all the properties down there in terms of assessment value. As you can see, it's not a widespread issue. It's not all across town, but in the downtown core, it is definitely, just like residential in the downtown core, it's being pressured upwards now. And there's a lot of activity around downtown, and so that neighborhood is being impacted all across the board, residential and business.
In this example, where is the business park? Is it part of downtown or North Yards? Do you know?
We honestly just picked a property out of each, so bear with us.
Okay. No,
I don't know that any one of those represents the
whole thing.
the business park, or we're just trying our best to sort of find, and we literally went to our tax department and said, can you give us 5 properties that you think have been pretty steady?
Okay. Any other questions on this one? Okay.
So let's move on to start with some assumption and look at the port requests for tax relief.
So this is a correspondence in your agenda from the port to Squamish terminals that we brought back for discussion today. We just wanted to talk a little bit with you. Right now, our current assumptions have just left everything at the 25 rate, just because we wanted things to be pretty stable as we compared what was going on from 2017 to 2018. It's not to presuppose that that's where council's landing. We did recognize, though, as we went through that council's concerns would probably be around addressing that correspondence and addressing business. So those are the 2 things that we're here to research a little bit more with you. So starting with the port, you all know that the dock was replaced in 2017. And for the first time, a port that had a relatively stable assessment base took a really significant jump in assessment value. And because that dock was just replacing what had been there, they only got about a $4 to $5 million break on what we'll call new improvements to the port, which is at the lower 22.5 rate. So last year, council reviewed it and did agree that probably it was a pretty significant hit to the port to eat all of that in 1 year. And so council determined they would take it back from 27.5 to 25 on a temporary basis. We're here to discuss where you'd like to move that next. For 2017, the property tax was reduced by $46,612, and if we were to continue on into 2018, the difference between 27.5 and 25 would be $47,199. Obviously, the port is an economic driver in this community. It employs the equivalent of 115 FTE and contributes $13 million of wages into the community. And what you're going to see shortly, I do actually have some economic statistics from the port that they were happy to send along. It's also on the website if anybody wants to look at other GP and how much they pay in provincial and federal taxes. But the long and the short of it is they are requesting again that there be some consideration. So we ran a number of scenarios on the port and brought out some statistical information to compare that to for you. We looked at the port if we were to remain at 25, a rate of 25. You can see that they would see a tax increase, but it's 0.4%. But it's $2,296, so that's more than the other average properties are seeing in this increase. If we were to go up higher than that, you can see it steadily progresses in terms of the impact to them. And obviously, by the time you get up to 27.5, they really are seeing a pretty significant hit on their tax at $49,000 bill in excess of last year. The port ratio in general is significantly higher than business. Business is sitting at 2.8 right now under the current assumptions. So they are already paying a ratio substantially higher than the other businesses. And they're paying a ratio that is also higher than light industry, which is currently sitting at 3.62. The port ratio, when we actually consider the grant from the province, goes up significantly. So we tried to work out what would be the equivalent in terms of tax revenue they're bringing in as a ratio to residential, and that starts to leverage us up into the 13 range. So again, a significant increase of four times that of business. The class 1, as you can see with each scenario, that actually when you look at this, the port, giving the port a break actually doesn't have a huge impact on the other classes. So that's why we're showing you class 1 and class 6, just so you get an understanding that it's a big impact to the port, less impact to the broader tax base. They're one taxpayer. So, so those are statistics for council to consider. This is all the ratios and everything on here assumes last year's provincial port contribution in 2017. We do estimate currently that CPI, we haven't got the official number from the ministry yet, but last year, July CPI was about 2% over the year average, so we are expecting that that grant would go up this year. I am going to put a little caveat on there. I just noticed this morning as I came in that the Ports Property Tax Act actually is expected to expire in March of 2018. So I've sent a scrambling email over to the ministry to say, do I need to be worried about this? Is this grant going to stop? I haven't heard back, and certainly in my discussions with the ministry and BC Assessment thus far, I have no indication that it's going to stop for 2018, but I'm not sure what's going to happen for 2019.
Do you think the grant's timing with 2018 has something to do with the fact that the Liberals, when they brought the cap on the port tax, it was scheduled to actually, the cap was supposed to be lifted in 2018?
Possibly. That's why I sent the scrambled text or email this morning.
Email from
So far, I have no indication from the ministry. In fact, when I talked to the ministry last week, I said, do you think that our grant's going to be similar to last year? Or I'm predicting about 2%. Is that reasonable? He said, we haven't calculated it yet, but that seems reasonable. So he didn't give me any indication that he's heard that it's coming out. So at this point, we'll assume that, if that's all right with council. If I hear differently back from the ministry, obviously that we'll rethink things a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Doug and Tim.
And I just wanted to make sure I understand the numbers. So when you look at, say, the port at 25, that column, class 1 increase, so in other words, from going from 27.5 to 25 for the port, class 1, which is residential, has, I take it, an average increase per household of $77. Am I reading that correctly? And that takes their total tax increase this year to 3.76.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, that's what their assumed tax increase is, yes.
And with a business, it adds $602 to an average business assessment.
Right, which is basically we're showing you the equivalent position. It doesn't add to the business. This is actually what is that value now. So if maybe you could jump back to the table, the second table that you have there. If you go on, if you bring this up, you can go right there. But okay, the next one, this one. So you can see on this one, this is all in. So I'm not showing you incremental change on 1 and 6. I'm just showing you what are they sitting at if we do with our base scenario, which is 25, and where are they sitting if we go up to 27.5. And so it's the spread between rate 25 and 27.5, because you can see here in this thing that the business is already at 602, assuming 25 rate for port. So it's the all-in increase, not an incremental increase.
It's not another $600.
Okay.
It's a different.
So it's in those numbers right there.
That's right.
But then when you go back to that slide then,
We're just showing you how that would change if we were to move the port.
so that 602 for business is what their increase is anyway,
That's right.
at 25.
And so if we start to
the previous table was
play,
at 25, port at 25.
correct. So what we're trying to do is stabilize
part I
everything
understand.
so that you're really understanding the impact. If we tried to move all the metrics at once, you would start to get clouded as to what's pressuring what. So what we're doing is we're stabilizing out based on 2017 ratios and rates. And then from there, we're saying, okay, what would happen if we moved the port up or down? How would that affect all these set rates? Now we'll go next to business. What if we move the business? How would that affect everybody? So that you get a sense of order of magnitude of the decision you're making.
So, so for residential, the class 1 line, if we tax the port at the maximum 27.5 versus 25, it's a difference of $4 per household.
Correct.
That's the number I think I was looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Ted?
Yeah, thanks. So listening, it sounded like, I mean, the port supplies all these jobs and all that kind of stuff. And when they had the fire, I know we gave them a little bit of a break. But the idea is to get them back up to 27.5, or is the idea to help them out because they supply so many jobs?
The idea is to give you the information you need, council, so that you
Yeah.
can decide what you'd like to do and how you want to treat that taxpayer. So we have another slide coming. Oh, where's the one that you did? Is that going to be in the port rate one? You did a great slide for me on the port. Why don't you flash to that one because it's a good one to I just wanted to give you, we're kind of showing our hand here on the next piece, but just to give you a rough idea of how the port taxes and assessments have moved in the past, this table, and we'll revisit this again because there's a couple points I want to make on this, and council needs to be aware of what's going to happen after 2018 to be able to make the decision properly. But just to give you a rough idea that the port has continuously had a little bit of a climb each year, which is probably different than what Prince Rupert has experienced. So they have been contributing, admittedly not necessarily to the same degree as some of the other rate increases, but again, we'll come back and explore this further when we're talking about the port tax act.
What do you mean by the grant?
That's the one from the province, the $400 and some odd thousand that we get to offset the cap each year.
Can you just flip back to where you're at?
Ted, do you have a?
Well, you know, I mean, I just kind of point out that I assume the idea is to ramp them up so that they're paying taxes, because we gave them a break when they had their fire. And I just assumed it would slowly climb up to what they're supposed to pay.
So staff definitely has a recommendation on this, and
Yeah.
that is that you phase them back up to
Yeah.
27.5. And that's what, when we get to the decision point, that will be staff's recommendation, that you consider maybe a maximum, frankly, this year of 26. But again, that's up to council. We're just going to give you, we've done some analysis, we've kind of looked at how it impacts everybody and how it impacts the port, and that's, we think that's a reasonable solution, but that's for you to decide.
In their letter, Christine, they talk about IDC factors.
Yeah.
Do you know what IDC is?
I'd have to go back and read their letter, but I can talk to you again as we get into the next stage. I'll talk to you about how the port is assessed and why their assessment bases vary and go up and down. So I don't know that I'm using the exact correct description that Kim's using. I'm certainly not immersed in it to that level, but certainly their land is assessed one way, their improvements are assessed a different way, and then the grant is increases it another way. So.
It's a different one.
Did you have your hand up? After
But I wanted to see that graph a little bit longer.
Oh, you will definitely see that graph again, because we're gonna come back on that one as we talk about the port's property tax appeal, but if you'd like to see it again now for this, I'm happy to
Do you want to
bring
see
it
it
back
now?
up.
Did you have a question about it?
Oh, it'd be nice to have it in front of me.
While we're looking, I can,
Well, I've got two other people want to ask questions. So.
So a key driver here, and the reason that you're not seeing what Prince Rupert did, is that the port has been fully depreciated to its full 80% for that period of time. And so unlike Prince Rupert, where they had a lot of assessments and they're all depreciating by 5% per year, our port hasn't seen that same thing. They've actually been going up by the land value base of 2% per year. Or, sorry, whatever the CPI is per year. And then the grant has matched that with its stated value plus its 2% of CPI per year. Why I need to talk to you is that from 2018 onward, you're going to start to see a little bit of a slide backwards, and that's why I kind of like leaving the 26 rates so that we can start raising their rates to offset some of that slide backwards and keep them kind of still paying a little more each year. So that's one of the reasons that we're suggesting to you leave it at 26 this year, because you will start to see a decline in depreciation, because now they have this, what is it, $15 million worth of dock improvements that are going to be depreciating 5% per year now over the next year until it gets, or next several years until it gets down to 80% of its depreciable value.
I thought we were at 25.
We're at 25 this year.
Oh, so
I'm
you're
just
recommending
suggesting council not raise it higher than 26.
Okay, thank you.
In between there, it's up to you, but so, it's all up to you, obviously. But I would say, based on the analysis and trying to be able to, as they start to depreciate, still have some room to raise the rates to offset some of that depreciation, I would suggest you want to stay under 26.
Susan? And then Doug.
Nothing, I was just going to talk about the IBC, it's just the load factor of grants in comparison to the other, yeah, it's how the load between the grant and the actual amount that they pay is distributed.
Doug?
Thank you. Last year, and I'm a little bit vague in the details, but my recollection is that there was, when Kim came and presented to us, they were trying to be included in the metro area, which would have had an effect on taxation. So speaking for myself, when I looked at our decision last year, it struck me as a bit of a stopgap, and the long-term solution for them was to somehow be put in a different group or a different class. Do you have any update on that?
I do. Ms. Stedman has provided me some information. They were unable to get that traction with the province, particularly with the elections and everything. They haven't been able to get that, so they're still at the same competitive disadvantage that they were at, that they explained to you last year at this point.
Do you know if that's ongoing, or has it just been put off because of the election?
As far as I know, they're still working on it, but I'm sorry, I can't say to what end or where they're at with it.
Ted?
well, it would be interesting to have an idea what that entails, what they're doing, so that, I mean, if they haven't acquired that this year, and let's say they acquire it and don't tell us, then we just keep going on. So and when I say don't tell us, I mean, I thought they would be the same as Prince Rupert, or Prince George. Rupert, you know, I read their stuff and I thought they would be the same as them. And here these guys are complaining.
I think their bigger concern is the Vancouver Earth Corridor, and as far as I know, there's been no change in that. So there's a federal break on the Earth Corridor of Vancouver, and they were trying to get some recognition in that.
Yeah. Because I don't know how it's going to affect the LNG when we have ships coming up from there. What we do on this heavy industry, we have to make sure we remember that's done.
Mm-hmm. We will talk about that today too.
Yeah.
Well, not fulsomely, but we'll talk to it in relation to the port.
Okay. Do you have more slides, or
We
is
do
this
have
where
some more.
you need a direction from us?
Well, we were going to let you see business too before we asked you
Okay,
to
let's
put
see.
your money on the table. But if you'd like to give us direction now, you're certainly welcome.
Just, it would be good to get a few more years on that port one, because the port was actually up close to $800,000. And in the couple of years before, it was actually coming down to that point. So, you know, they're still way below what they were paying 12 years ago in taxes.
They were. I guess what I would suggest to council is that there.
Go ahead. So you can see it's starting to trend down.
Yeah.
You add a couple more years into that, they were actually quite a bit higher.
Yes. So again, class 4 is always depreciated. All of their improvements are depreciated. That's nothing's changed. All class 4 is assessed that way, port or not. It's just that the rates for the port are 5 and depreciation rates vary anywhere from 2.5 to 6.5 depending on the industry. So yes, probably the port was taxed higher. There was a history in British Columbia of major industry being heavily taxed. A lot of communities saw the downside of putting so much investment or so much leverage and stock in one industry. I guess I would warn you to not do that again, having come out of Campbell River and seen its impact. And so I think as we go through the Ports Property Tax Act, I talk you through some of those specifics and some of the good and the bad of major industry and how it's taxed. So you can think about that more fulsomely in terms of where you want to go with the port.
Okay. So let's finish the tax roll, property tax discussion. Okay.
So I know like it's a busy slide. So we've already checked out like the different valuation in different neighborhood. And it was obvious that some businesses are being hit harder this year than other. On that slide, we just wanted to show the committee that like businesses are not necessarily like leaving Squamish or doing so bad. So on the left side is the graph of the total business license issued every year. That's the line at the top, and at the bottom is the new licenses every year. We can notice that with the loss of the Squamish Festival, like it was in 2015, in 2016 and 2017, new businesses still increased, and it's mostly from construction businesses. On the right side, we just wanted to have like a little.
May I just make one quick comment on the business license too? Our building department has been doing a really good job of also chasing down business licenses and making sure that cancellations are removed from the business license statistics, and a lot of that happened in 2016 and 2017. So that could also be factored in why it looks like it's dropping a bit, and it's really just cleaning up systems and making sure that we're running down the cancellations and making sure we take them out of the system.
We just wanted also to compare with folio. The difference between business licenses and folio is non-resident, and so the number of folio has like continuously like increased over the last few years, and the difference between like 2014 and 2015 is again like the music festival.
So essentially these two graphs show you that business is still growing in this community. So we haven't scared them all away yet. And I think you had some key, I think you had some key information too about some of the anecdotal information we are getting from cancellations. Did you go through that?
Well, it's mostly like businesses leaving town, and like lots of like staffing problems, and I think it's like everywhere in the corridor, and like the housing costs for employees or residents.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, questions, Susan?
Thanks. So last year I measured this exact bubble coming out, and the entire amount of new businesses, because we have open data, the entire amount of new businesses were single construction companies. Every carpenter that swings a hammer that is gotten from the lower mainland comes up here and needs a business license. They come in here and apply for a business license, and it hits our business impact. This is completely false economy here.
Well, the
This
folio
is not brick and
count is
mortar
not.
tax-paying businesses.
Just through the chair, the folio count is not. That's why you were giving you both.
I agree the folio count, but when we are measuring impact on taxation, you measure brick and mortar, and we should be measuring brick and mortar, and we still don't collect statistics in our, I don't know how, the entire time I've been in council, I've been trying to get business license statistics. They've never come forward. never, like, we've never looked at where our businesses, like, we don't understand our business climate here because we can't extract data from our business licensing. We don't do it online, we don't know what's brick and mortar, and then every single business license that we take in, even if it's a home-based daycare that's paying residential taxes, we measure here. So to say, you know, and then we look at our tax rate and think businesses are doing great, we can spread it across, but really we have literally a countable amount of brick and mortar businesses paying tax. So you're not paying the business tax rate if you're sitting at home on a computer. You're
So
not
is your
paying the
question,
business tax
do
rate.
we know the brick and mortar number?
We don't know the brick and mortar. I'm pointing out that this is a false chart. We're looking at business licenses. We're seeing a construction bubble. We don't have a business economy.
So what,
if I
I think
may-
what staff's trying to do is show both the folio account and the business license to create a fuller picture. I don't think anyone's suggesting we make a decision just on business licenses, which is
I
why the
just-
slide's here. The CAO has her hand.
Yes, the
Linda?
folio account and business licenses shouldn't be up
I'm
here
gonna
at
let-
all.
Well,
With
sorry,
that.
I will talk to folio account because I
Okay.
think it should be based on what you just got.
And then Christine.
Thank you, through the chair. We have a number of our business license statistics on our website. So if council has other statistics that
It's not
somehow
good.
aren't being provided, I'm open to hearing that, but we have our business license statistics on the website.
Okay, Christine, you want to talk about
I just
folio?
wanted to indicate that the folios are representative, I believe, of your businesses. They include class 6 in residential areas. They include your downtown business areas. It's everything rated as class 6 and the folio count within that. So if you're upset or concerned that business licenses, that's why we've given you the other demographic to show you that there is still business growth. It was one of the concerns we raised when we looked at business licenses. It was like, is that really reflective of what we have been? And that's why we put the folio count up.
So I have a question.
A follow-up question.
So based on that, I'm just wondering about our business incentives in the business park, our tax incentives. Are they still running or is that gone?
It's expired.
Is that-
Those are gone.
Okay,
Those are in all of this.
okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay.
So,
Oh, Doug?
well, just, I mean, the assessment growth, because over the last couple of years, we've seen different segments hit by sort of spikes in assessment. Valley Cliff residential, I think last year, for example. Is there any explanation given for the 18.5% increase in business assessments?
The business assessment, is that the 18.5 for just that year, or it's over the time frame? Sorry, I'm just going to confer with my statistician.
Where's the 18.5?
On the assessment growth,
Oh.
18.5, what number were you using for that? Because I don't believe that was the growth this year.
I've confirmed that number.
But is it for this year, or was it for the period that we were reviewing?
I think it now is just for 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of that in terms of talking to the BC assessment and in our review, if we go back to the slide of the various businesses we picked out of neighborhoods, it is Cleveland that's being hit really hard. And the highest best use on that property because of the residential, even though we downzoned Cleveland in theory, the residential use, they've had 3 comparatives on that street that are over $1 million of purchase price. And they recognize that. So just like residential's being hit by those purchase price and availability of buying land at higher, so is the business.
Oh, so this is the downtown Vancouver scenario where there's a property, it's got an old building with maybe 1 or 2 floors of residential, commercial on the ground floor, but it's zoned for maybe 30 or 40 stories. And so the land value is very, very high.
They consider highest best.
Split only between a relatively low amount of development.
Well,
And that doesn't cure itself until you actually build the 40 stories, and then everybody is paying throughout the 40 stories.
I don't know that
sharing
it's that
land value.
complicated based on what I talked to BC Assessment about. They really believe that it's just comparable sales in the neighborhood, and the comparable sales for another business of that nature that's sold and is probably being redeveloped into what you're a mixed-use property is high enough that, you know, there's enough highest best use out of that property that when it resells, people are redeveloping it.
It's driving the land value.
That's correct.
And the land value is being shared by essentially an underdeveloped property. and the business being the ground floor of it.
Now, BC assessment's usually pretty fair. You'll see that the comparatives versus what they raised that business to is still, they're still lower than what the comparative really went to. And they gave me 3 specific comparatives of what happened on Cleveland. Those properties, sale prices 1.5, 1.575, and then 1.11, and they've got the subject property that we sent over to them at 1. So they're still trying to give them a little bit of recognition that they're not that property, but it's definitely being driven by that percentage of increase. They look at the square foot per property. So right now, the subject property that we chose is being assessed at $182 per square foot of land versus the comps are all 185 to 263 per square foot. So they're still giving them a break, but it's being driven absolutely by those market assessments.
And that wouldn't cure itself then until the building is redeveloped and the land value is split among 6 floors instead of 1 or 2 floors.
And to be honest, it's any property in this community. They're all feeling the pressure of land values going up, and that's the reality, whether they're a business or residential. In the downtown cores, they're getting hit because those lands are being redeveloped, and the comparable sales now to be able to put mixed use or business or residential multi-density impacts assessment values.
Just to follow on this, just because I think it's important to understand what's happening here, but that's unique almost to Cleveland Avenue because, for example, with the built businesses in the business park or in Garibaldi Mall, there is no future redevelopment potential.
Correct.
So
They're bare land.
it's done. So it's just kind of market value going up. They're not paying taxes based on land value for potentially a 6 or 8 or a 10-story tower that might be built in the next couple of years.
Well, and surprisingly, even like Tantalus area, which in theory you could probably densify more, but they consider it's built out, and we're not seeing the property turnover that we're seeing in the downtown core right now. So all these things factor, just like a residential property in downtown got hit last year with assessment-based increase, now your businesses are, and it is a factor. I mean, that's the downside of property taxation, is that it's based on these assessment rates and that values, and that's sometimes we can only control so much in terms of tax rates.
Thank you. Because I think it's important to understand the phenomenon in these numbers and what creates these numbers, so you don't go and start making knee-jerk reactions to something that's more of an assessment anomaly for a particular area. Thank you.
So the difference in the top number, sorry, the scale, the total goes down, but the number of business licenses go up in 2017?
What's the question?
So the total, I'm just trying to understand the graph lines here, the new businesses, there's 442 in 2017, and the total number of businesses go down by 22?
There's the run-up,
Okay.
so that's why it's going
Okay.
down. And like Christine mentioned, there's been, like the business license department has been cleaning up
It's been
and
cleaning up.
chasing like business licenses that haven't been, like that have been dormant, just to cancel them.
So the total number of businesses went down by 22, but the new business increase
Yeah.
was 34. Okay, yeah, the scale is crazy. That's when you look at the bar chart compared to the actual numbers. And then the speculation, the taxation based on speculation, the people purchasing properties, expecting zoning to change as well and overpaying for properties. How does that affect business tax rate? Because there has been a ton of speculation with expectation of rezoning. Does that impact BC assessment in a certain percentage?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. They look at comparable sales. So absolutely it will.
The critical thing is, if we want to change how BC assessment assesses, it's a provincial change in law. And so if municipalities want to start thinking about how they preserve their downtowns, they either have to downzone everything quite significantly, or they work to ask BC assessment to not assess on highest and best use for small business in the downtown core so that communities can protect that asset. And it's counter to a lot of other provincial policies that are telling communities to densify and create housing. And so it is a challenge for local councils across the province to figure out this balance. And it's not just the big cities. We're certainly feeling pressure, but that's where the effort needs to go, is it's a change in provincial law, or else we get really quite critical of our own zoning in the downtown to alleviate this. So we're either taking away people's value or they're paying more taxes, and where is that balance? So it's a challenge for sure.
And again, we just brought this one back up just so you can see some of the neighborhoods, so how businesses are being, how distorted they are in terms of that average 602, right? Like Garibaldi Highlands, not a lot of businesses that way, but really not seeing a lot of, in fact, gone down right through to the poor downtown that's getting significantly hit. And it really is about assessment. And frankly, I mean, you know, I don't like to use the term, well, you've got all this more value in your property now, because I know that's really feels very unfair when you don't plan to leave your property. But it is true of all classes and all, not all classes, but most of the classes that we're dealing with predominantly, which is our residential, our business, even down to our light industry, they look at comparable.
Yeah, last comment and then let's.
Thanks, and this is, I think Doug's point was very salient here in the fact that future zoning definitely affects business taxes, and that, you know, I completely agree that it's a provincial issue that has to be lobbied for, but it is definitely about our zoning as well, and our ability to protect businesses is putting comprehensive in comprehensive, where it isn't affected by residential. It's a very easy fix. You put your workplace in comprehensive buildings, and the ground floor retail can still be there, but you know that that's going to be a business that has to earn enough to be able to afford. You can't sell coffees and make our tax rate. So if we're residentializing our employment areas, we have to know that those businesses are going to be affected by a multiplier that is not going to be servicing a residential area. It has to be an industry. And those industries have to go in comprehensive areas of employment, which we've done in the future, but we have like 5 years before it actually, those buildings will be built, and we can have places for businesses to grow into. So that growth rate, we're going to continue to see business license drop off in brick and mortar businesses if we can't actually give them a place to grow and work into that's a reasonable tax rate, because the taxes are killing our downtown businesses. It's going to be a big hit this year to have 9% taxes and that hit. So I think we have to adjust. There's no other way except for adjusting the tax rate, or we're going to lose businesses.
Okay. I think there's a lot of really solid points in there, and unfortunately, I can't fix that today,
No,
but...
well, we can fix it a little bit, but I don't expect a big change. But I really think that 2.8 has to go to 2.0, because we can't triple 2.0. Because we can't triple our tax rate.
We'll talk to you about, again,
That's
some
the level we're
recommendations
asking
and
for.
what your impacts. We're going to bring you a similar screen to what we brought you with the port to show you the impact on everyone else by changing business. So,
Okay, let's go.
so this one you saw the last time. We just updated the Squamish number in terms of how we sit in terms of the corridor. In terms of ratio and rates, you can see that we're pretty in line on the ratios. We're fairly stable, you know, we're reasonable. And I'll always argue that this is the most important metric. What are you in terms of residential? Because everyone's tax base is different, and tax rates are all over the map depending on assessment values and assessment bases. I will always tell you, you need to focus on the ratio and decide if that ratio makes sense in terms of residential. That's one of the reasons that we've moved, which I'm very pleased about. This council has moved to be more stabilized ratios so that we're not flying tax rates up and down every year. It's really looking more comprehensively across the base. We decide what makes sense against residential in terms of taxation rates as a factor, and we stay with it. Okay. So here's a scenario. So if you were to start playing with your business ratio scenarios, these are the impacts you would start to see on your effective rate. You can see it moves from 3 to 5 if we went down even 1 or 2 full 0.2 ratio reduction. You would be now putting your effective rate for the entire all classes at 5, and your residential class to 5.72. So yes, it would have some impact on your business. for sure, would certainly help, brings them down from 9.5 to 3.6, but it does have outfall.
Yeah.
Can you just flip back one slide? I just want to see.
Which way are we going, Chair?
Patty's just gonna look at this.
Well, that's all right, so let's
Come back to that for 1
this
second.
slide.
Sure, we can come.
Thanks. 8.84, that's different than the number on the other slide. Okay, you can go back. Why is that 9.50 instead of 8.84?
That's the increase
This is
versus
the
rate.
increase in the average. So remember the second table we showed you was sort of the average. We said the average business would be hit by a $602 per year increase in taxation.
Yeah, I got
And
it.
a 9.5. So this is all based on.
Yeah, I was just trying to do, I was just trying to. That's what I did. I wish we had these in our agenda.
Okay, is there another slide, or are we at a discussion point?
Pretty well getting to the decision point, so we're going to kind of throw it back to you. We certainly, recommendations from staff that you do consider not putting the port all the way back to 27.5 at this time. We would recommend that you try to stay under 26 or at 26. From a business perspective, if you are going to change the ratio down, which is not, I mean, to get back to the BC average ratio is closer to 2.7. If you wanted to bring that down, we suggest you phase that in, or you're going to have a pretty significant impact to your other classes. And we also would suggest that you think about adjusting the managed forest accordingly. And the light industry we can talk about right now. We're trying to keep the relationships of all the ratios. So those, once we decide business, then I'll want to revisit the managed forest and the light industry. But so far, they don't have a huge impact. So if we went down on business, adjusting managed forest would really have almost no impact. As you can see, a 0.5 reduction in ratio would have a 0.01% on all the other rates, the effective rate, residential rate. And if you brought the light industry down a 0.5 ratio, it would have about a 0.03%. So you can see those other two don't have a huge impact on the rate skews, but I would recommend that we try to keep some thought process around how we want light industry to set against business and try to keep managed forest in line with business. That's the business decision we made 2 years ago in terms of where ratios should sit.
The entire
Okay,
ratio.
boy, we've got Ted, then Peter, then Susan.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, thanks.
I was-
On the port, I think that, you know, I was happy to support giving them some relief and also happy to give them some this year, but I'd like this, then it should go back to normal for the next council that's coming on, so the next council deals with them just the way it's supposed to be.
So this is the rate that will be in place when the next council comes on,
It's
just
the rate
for
that's in place, but
clarification.
it'll be, we'll step it up half the way, and then the next time it can go back up. Yeah, you're right, it'll be the rate that's in place, but with kind of like a recommendation that it goes back to normal after 2 more years. And I know you're talking about depreciation and all that other stuff, but then I think that's fair. The council that was in during their hardship gave them a break.
Quick question, what was the total tax requisition again this year?
For
The-
all in,
Yeah.
27 million, do you have the first slide, the background slide? 27.6
7 million.
No, sorry.
Did you catch that? Is it 27.5?
It's the back.
27.7. Okay, Susan, Doug, Peter.
I just wanted to go back to the ratio in the tax classes slides.
The first one, based on what we are
Yeah,
today?
exactly.
Okay. I also have another slide of if you were to move the port a bit and move the business a bit, we have another one of these ratio
Yeah,
slides.
that'd be helpful.
But I think they want this one.
Or all the, all the tax classes,
That one, is that the one you're looking
yeah,
for?
that's it, thank you.
So this was based on the 25 for the port and the ratio of 2.8 that we had last year for business.
Is that good? Can I move on? Susan?
I know it's a lot of material to digest. That one,
Yeah, that's too much.
that one is also on your handouts because we know it's small and it's hard to read, so.
Okay. Yep, you can go.
Okay,
Thank
Doug
you.
and Patty.
So,
No, Peter and then Patty, sorry.
go ahead.
No, it's Doug, Peter, Patty.
Oh, okay. I forgot what I was going to say. So we're at comment point now?
Yeah, we're on expressing
Decision?
opinions, please.
Oh,
Okay.
I still have a question.
Well, you can ask questions too, but I'd like to move this to a conclusion.
Okay.
Okay, so two issues. One is the port, and one is, for me, is class 6, the business and other. And business and other, you know, in my first budget as a councillor, we moved it down to the BC average, and that was a deliberate step to attract business. It came down from whatever it was before, and I don't recall that. And we also moved light industry down, and actually heavy industry as well, but there was no heavy industry. So I think I'm happy with where it is actually right now. Changes, as have been suggested in conversation, down to 2.0, for example, would be a dramatic shift. I know just from reading the media reports about the city of Vancouver, when it was up at 6 times residential, and it tried to regularize that, it went down by 0.1, I think, per year. And it's now somewhere around 4.5 times residential. Because these small changes like that have a huge impact on residential taxation, or can have. And I don't think it's required. I look at this as, this is an anomaly that affects some businesses, not all businesses, with the land value issue on Cleveland Avenue, and that's just kind of one of the quirks of the system we have to live with. But keep in mind, if you're giving some kind of a benefit to somehow soften that blow for the landlords, you're also giving the benefit to Home Depot and Walmart, the business park, the mall, and Garibaldi Estates and so forth, because it's all the same class. And there are some very big taxpayers there. That number, $602, is the average increase. There are some that are going to be way above that, which means there's going to be a lot that will be below that. So that's $50 a month for the average business. And I don't think that's out of line, given the increase in our budget and all of the increased things that we have to pay for. So I'm quite content with where that ratio is, and I hadn't thought about the forestry one, but putting that aside for the moment. As far as the port goes, I still look at this, I agree with Councillor Pryor, I look at this as sort of a transition. I like the idea of averaging. They had a bit of a disaster, which was kind of unique, and we tried to assist in some way without burdening our taxpayers. I was going to say just go on a 5-year plan and put it up 0.5%, or half a number per year, so go from 25 to 25.5, 26, 26.5, 27, 27.5, more or less do it over 5 years, until staff mentioned that they will start depreciating this asset in another year or two, which will bring it down. So I think we can be a little bit more aggressive with that. We're only making the decision this year. The next council, of course, is making it for next year. So I would go with 26. I think that's a fair number. I'll wait for other comments. I'll eventually put a motion on the floor, but I'll wait for other comments.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Peter, then Patty, and then
I
Susan.
agree with Doug, and I think he said it
What's the
right.
decision?
I'm in favor of 26 and working our way back to 27 eventually. And I also agree with the business class. I think it's pretty good. We're like 4 points below the average. I really wouldn't want to.
Bob, yeah.
No, you are a little bit above the average right now when we look at the BC
BC
average. I believe it was 2.73 BC average, not
0.07.
0.753, yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at
So
the
we
wrong
are a
column.
little bit above the BC average ratio.
Yeah.
So
Close enough.
if you,
Sorry, I looked at the wrong
can
column.
you go to the next?
I'm
What
so
it-
happy with where it is.
So
Okay.
Council, we did put together, just so you could get a sense of it, we put together an assumption if the port went up to 25.5, if the business and managed forests went to 2.7 and the light industry went to 3.7. We put together that, and that's what that would look like. Just because I know it's hard to, all these numbers flying around, to get a sense of what the magnitude or impact would be if you did those things. So. And the business being the number one impact on the 4.74% that you're seeing up there. The business is the big driver on that.
Right. Hold on. Why did you do that?
I'm sorry.
Before we added that, I had Patty and Susan.
Just wanted to clarify one thing. I think Doug was suggesting 25.5. You're
No, I went to
26 now.
26.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah,
But
because of
then you said
depreciation.
5.5 after that. Is
Because
that-
of the depreciation.
Okay. Can you just help me understand the light industrial rate? So we're we're under the BC average ratio. We're significantly under the BC average rate. Was there any discussion, and you just touched on it completely right now, so, and maybe it doesn't have a lot of effect, but it's going down almost 8%. Well, business is going up almost 9%, and I know they're not equal, we're not comparing with apples and apples. Is there a reason why you didn't look at bringing the light industrial rate? Because as Doug was saying, we brought the light industrial rate down to BC average, but we've never kind of readjusted it as BC averages changed too, so.
So through the chair, 2 years ago, I think council will remember, we did a bit of a fulsome discussion about, you know what, I'd love you to move to ratios and then stabilize ratios. And at that time, we had about a 1 spread from business to light industry. So that's one of the reasons that I'm suggesting you might want to maintain that type of spread, just because philosophically I understood that to kind of be where you landed with the ratios. I'm not tied to it. If you want to go up or down in light industry, we certainly can, bearing in mind it doesn't have a significant impact on the other rates.
No.
The other thing that you have to be careful of when you have light industry and business other is that properties often run between the two quite easily. So what starts to happen is everyone goes, oh, that rate's better, and they all try and jump off and go to the other class somehow. So they really start to play. We start to see some movement between the two. So keeping them relatively close is not a bad idea. And again, I guess I just come back, we'll talk about this more when we get to the Ports Property Tax Act, but what is council's philosophy? You want economic drivers. How much do you want their ratios? How high do you want those ratios to really get? You know, is it fair that they're paying multiple times residential? Are they that much more impactful on infrastructure? So.
Yeah, that wasn't my question, but I understand that, yeah.
You good, Patty?
I would like to just see what that effect would be. I mean, we talk about it's not a lot of effect if you move all these things, but if you move a lot of things a little, there can be a multiplying effect.
Sure. So you wanted to move light industry to
A little bit higher ratio.
like 4? Or
I'd like to see the effect.
So we do have a working paper that we can play with things a little bit if we'd like to go there. So we can play with rates and see if we land somewhere council's happy with.
okay, let's get all the input here before we play around. So hold that. So we've got some consensus a little bit on the port, 26.
I would agree on the port stuff too.
So
I would also agree with
And then,
Port at 26.
we've got probably some varying opinions on business. So I've got Susan, and then I got Doug and Ted. And Jason, do you want to weigh in at some point? Let me know.
Although I don't disagree with Councillor Race that everything affects everything, you have to look at the economy, you have to look at your employment, you have to look at the fact that 40% of your entire community is commuting out of this community for work. If you want businesses to grow and you have a 9% multiplier, it's not going to happen. We have nowhere for.
Hold on, that's
Not a 9% multiplier,
Not
just
a
to
9%,
be clear.
sorry, 3%
The multiplier is 2.7.
9% tax
Or
increase.
2.8.
Excuse me, that's totally, yeah, 3% multiplier.
That's not scary, Becky.
Yeah, the 3% multiplier on top of our residential tax rate doesn't even come close to the amount of resources. Our businesses actually use less resources than residential. The amount of, I agree about the large businesses and that you're affecting, but that all is employment, and we want employment to stay in Squamish. It's not going to. I can tell you right now, businesses are struggling to make their tax rate.
Okay.
So it's, I
Do
don't,
you have
you know,
what are your
I
thoughts on the
recommend
port and
that-
that rate?
I recommend that we lower it, that we work towards lowering, and I agree with Councillor Race that it shouldn't be done. 9.0 is too extreme, looking at the boards, but we have to move other tax rates as well. We have to look at the port, and although I was going to say 26, I would go to 26.5 and play with the business tax rate a little bit more. That one business employs a lot of people, but there's a lot of other businesses that employ a lot of people. And to actually move our tax rate down a few points, keep the port at 26.5, so you're bringing in a little bit more cash, and then work on getting the business multiplier down to somewhere reasonable. You know, you have to look at, we've tax incentivized the oceanfront, we've done a lot of things to bring business to town. It hasn't happened. We don't have any more places to put business. So we have to help the businesses that are here now stay, so we don't continue to lose business licenses.
So through the chair, just want to be clear though, every time you move the port, you can see that while business is seeing a 602 average increase, moving the port to 26 is a $21,000 per year increase. I don't want you to lose sight of that. I know it seems easy to move them, but it is a significant impact in tax.
I totally agree, and I agree with Mayor Heinzman that playing with the rates and not just looking at one tax class to put the burden on the other tax class, but moving light industry, I totally agree with as well, and lowering businesses, we have to start moving that multiplier down. For a little, until we build an economy in this town, we can't be a coffee shop, like $1 million coffee shop.
Okay.
Crazy.
I've got lots of people and we need to finish, we still have 2 other agenda items that are important. Doug, Ted.
Thank you. Just the slide you had up there before, where the tax change for class 6, there it is. So about 418. So we started off at 602 at the beginning of the meeting. How did we get to 418?
That was if we took the business down to, what was the assumption on that one? 2.7?
2.7.
Yeah. So if we took the ratio down, that would become your business.
Oh, down by 0.07.
So we did.
From 2.8 to 2.73.
That's right. We kind of did what would be maybe a reasonable landing point to say, okay, the port needs to go up some. So we put it up to 25.5 at that point, and the business down to 2.7, and then we added in the factors of, and if we wanted to keep some ratio close for light industry and managed forest, what would that look like? Just so you have a sense of magnitude of change of these things. So you can go back to the first one. And that brought this answer. And you might want to put it back on duplicate screen.
Okay, so Patty's like said 5 times. Next year we need papers so we can see all the numbers in the agenda next year, please.
Yes, I'm sorry, the
So
agenda
we don't have
closed.
to-
We just got the rates on like last
But even if you brought all the handouts
on table,
so
sure.
that people can spread out their papers and go back and forth would be
Yeah,
a lot easier.
absolutely.
Okay, Doug and Ted, did you just talk? I lost track.
Well, I just asked the question.
Yes, okay.
2.7. And so, and that does look reasonable.
You've got
You know,
duplicate on
so, and that's staying with our philosophy of keeping it on the BC average, which has crept underneath where we were. So there is some relief. I'm not keen on moving light industrial, however, which I think should be closer to that. And trying to raise that is, I think, the wrong way to go on that, because we're going to be, what we're trying to attract is a lot of light industrial actually, not just retail. So manufacturing and all the rec tech stuff and all that kind of stuff, that's all going to be light industrial.
So you want to leave that? at
Leave
its
the light
current-
industrial rate, yeah, I'd take,
Because that scenario you just saw had it going down slightly.
that's the result of the port, I think.
No, it's actually because of a ratio change. That scenario that took it down to 402 was because you dropped the light industrial rate as well. slightly.
We did, yes. Just we took it to be one off, like one above business in this scenario.
So
But we can run any scenario you want.
So
So
Doug
if
went
you
from
want to
3.8
play, we'll show
to
you what it looks
3.7.
like with what you want.
Oh, I beg your pardon, okay, yeah, I can live with that.
Okay.
I get you, sorry.
So-
I thought it was going the other way. I think that was what the mayor was suggesting, was to actually raise it,
I was
increase it.
suggesting we actually be able to see the effect. I wasn't trying to suggest
Well,
any
okay.
determination.
Wrong
Okay.
terminology.
Ted?
Yeah, thanks. Talking about seeing the effect, and I've always had a little bit of trouble with the finance. And when I heard Doug go, you know, when you look at business, we have Walmart, and we have all those big players in business, right? And then we have the little guy on Cleveland Avenue that's got the tea shop. And so I hear Susan talking about those guys. And then we get a ratio that compares all business, which is Walmart with the tea shop, and then you factor it all in. And it's hard for me to understand it at that point. So perhaps, and I won't be here for another budget, but it'd be nice to put a face to those numbers. Like even if we had a sheet that showed the big stuff and a sheet that showed a few of the little stuff, well, how it's going to affect them. That would certainly help me because, I mean, Walmart's parking lot is full all the time. They're doing okay. And the little tax increase for them, not going to fizz them. And although a lot of the coffee shops are full all the time as well, I mean, business is good right now, I think, for you know, anything you go in on Cleveland is busy. Anyway, just
Okay.
on that, yeah.
To help, thanks Ted, to help move us forward, can we go to the, let's see the impact slide, the Excel spreadsheet? And can we put in 26 for the port,
Yep.
2.7 for business, 3.7 for light industry, and whatever you did to the farm
Okay?
as a starting point? Like the scenario that you, that last scenario you showed us, except move it up to 26 for the port.
That's what we're working on. And I just want to make it clear to this committee, the small property on Cleveland is going to get impacted. Doesn't matter if you move this ratio down 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, 0.7. They're getting impacted this year and we're not going to be able to protect them. I just want to make that clear. They are going to get hit.
Okay. Just make it really small, Jason, are you going to come in at the 11th hour and be a big spoiler here? Or do you want to say something?
I'll say something now.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually don't think we should play around with those ratios, mostly for the point that Ted made. Like, I understand what we're trying to achieve, but I'd much rather us look at it in a very much more focused way. So if that means, really what it comes down to is, we as a council, if this is a priority for us, we need to rezone Cleveland just for commercial. That on its own would have a very significant impact on the way assessments are done. And if we had the idea that we wanted mom and pop shops, 1 or 2 story commercial only, that's the way to do it. I don't agree with giving a tax break to Walmarts and others of the world. I think we do need that. There is an impact on the community from these businesses beyond just serving locals. I mean, whether it's people on the highway to Whistler or whatever. So I don't, unfortunately, I can't agree with that. With the port, happy that it's moving in that direction. I'm fine to support Doug's sort of suggestion of the incremental. Sort of leave it at that. But I do think that we're close to the BC average. I don't want us to go in that direction because I don't think it will actually make a huge difference on Cleveland, and that we risk losing a significant portion. And we have to think about the residential taxpayers on this one.
Yeah. Okay, Patty, and then I'll weigh in, and then we'll look at.
Yeah, I wanted to just look at these, basically to prove they don't really do anything. Like the small incremental pieces aren't going to magically solve the problem we have. And just to reiterate, I think Jason's bang on. Other than we need to get the province to maybe look at a completely different way of doing assessments, which may be a steep hill to climb. I think it's fundamental to our policies, and it's challenging because, as Karen said earlier, policies are driving more taxpayers per inch of infrastructure and densifying. Like, there's a whole bunch of good reasons why our policies are going where they are, but there's an unintended consequence here. And I don't know how to correct that unintended consequence other than dramatic things that Jason was saying, which have unintended consequences too. So I wanted council to go through this incremental so they really sort of understood the nickel and dime of it and how it may or may not change ratios. I suspect we'll end up back where we are right now, but I thought it would be worthwhile to at least have a look.
We're happy to do that.
So can you explain what's on the screen right now?
Anushka, what's your filter?
So this is like what the assumption you requested, like the port at 26, business and other and forest average at 2.7, and the light industry at 3.7. So it brings the 2018 tax rate to 3.19. So this is like the same table that we looked at before. That's the effect on average property, the average in each class. As well, if I can move, we can stop and look at that. And I also have the effect on the tax rate and the ratio on each class.
Okay, so I'm going to take that in. So that's moving things port up and everything else down slightly.
Yeah.
That's
I think yes, it does move the light industry down because it was at 3.81
Yeah, down to 2.7. Yeah.
okay.
or 3.7.
Yeah.
And then can we run the scenario where we just leave the port at 26, leave business at 2.8,
Sure.
leave light industry where it currently is, which is 3.82. Okay. So this is just moving the port up, but leaving everything else in our ratios that we had last year.
So business really didn't go down.
It went from 6
It's just slight impact because of the light industry and forest that you weren't seeing on the original slide.
And the thing that did change significantly was the residential tax rate, which is 3.68 there,
And forest.
increase, and it was 4.7 or 8 on the previous scenario.
Business, that's all business. Business absolutely smacks into residential. When you move it, it changes residential. That's what all our analysis
So you
shows.
moved it onto the residential tax rates.
So I'm hearing some consensus around moving the port to 26. There's a few, I know that you'd like to see business come down. Jason would like to see it stay the same. Doug wanted it the same.
I'm okay at the same.
Same. Patty, you were,
I'd bring it down a little bit.
you would bring it
But I would
down?
also put light industrial a little bit out, well,
Yeah.
it doesn't make much effect, but
Okay, and where are you sitting? Oh, wait,
same as who?
same as who? Where's-
Keep the rate.
Keep the rate.
Right, no.
So we have 4 votes for keeping the rate. For business at 2.8.
The ratio.
The port up,
Yeah.
the ratio, sorry, and keeping the port to 26. Susan?
Thanks. Can you just show the business rate low? Yeah.
This one.
No, go back.
You just want us to play with the ratio?
change.
I
You
want
us
the
to-
ratio to change to
2.7.
2.7 and go back to the, show me that, can I look at
Just
the
business?
impact?
Yeah.
Just business?
And port still at 26.
4%, okay, go back, yeah. I wish I had the sheet, I wish I had the Excel sheet so I could play myself.
Well, you can see basically,
I know.
basically you're hitting residential.
I see that, but I wanted to see if it was a point, can you go back down? And the light industry, a point with that,
Increase light
increase
industry.
it by a point.
Do you want it to, by just
No,
a
no,
point?
just
Like
give it a number.
3.92, is that what you're thinking?
For,
The light industry?
yeah,
Okay,
I just want to have a look.
okay, 3.92.
I know, it's ridiculous. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Really, right?
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
bringing you what we think
No,
are
I
kind of your
just-
key drivers and your key.
But I'm looking at them, it's like the difference of $10 on the residences, because there's 1 million residences, but the difference to the actual business is significant, and that's what I wanted to show. A 4.61 municipal increase in municipal tax dollars is like a $20 increase per house. If you're looking at the tax rate on the business, it's enormous. It's thousands.
No.
Thousands, it's not thousands.
So we
Go
gotta
back.
be careful because we're looking at averages. So for some
Yeah.
homes in
Yeah.
Valley Cliff and downtown, it's
It
not
might
a
be
couple.
$30.
It's gonna be more, and for some
Yeah.
businesses,
It's going to be
it's
more.
gonna be less. But Cleveland's getting a hit no matter what.
I know,
Because
the
we've
difference
got
between.
possibly a combination of flawed zoning with a flawed assessment process. And we're caught in the middle of that.
I'm talking about the difference between the amount of residences versus the amount of businesses.
Yeah.
And the amount of raising the tax rate for the residences over the amount of we've had a huge increase in not a huge increase, like how many thousands of people, a few thousand people are sharing that, whereas businesses is 22 businesses sharing the impact.
Okay, I know there's a dissenting voice here, but we actually have a general
Business
consensus.
voice, not a dissenting voice, a business voice,
And so we've got two people who would like to see the business rate come down, but we
to
have
average.
4 other councillors who have asked for it to stay the same.
I thought Councilor Ray said he was standing at 2.7. I heard you say that. Is that not true anymore?
So anyway,
You were
Ted,
with
Jason,
Jason.
Ted,
Yeah,
Jason,
so-
let us go through the
so-
chair. Ted,
Just to your point, I mean, I don't want to see Walmart get a tax break. And so the little guys on Cleveland aren't tied in with Walmart. And so, yeah, we have to, what I was thinking is, and I don't know if Cleveland Avenue businesses pay any kind of utility, or if there's any other little tax thing that we do to individual businesses on Cleveland, where we do have control over it, like garbage cans, things like that. I don't know if there is anything, but I know we may be able to give some relief to Cleveland through some of our other taxes, possibly. But I don't want to see Walmart get a tax break.
okay. Jason,
I would just say if we were to toy with some of the business one, I think only I would consider the light industry one. I think you could make an argument there of bringing that ratio down and there would be less of an impact. And then it's not capturing things like big retailers, like whether it's London Drugs, we'll use another example, but big chain retailers, all of that. And some very Squamish specific kind of businesses that are growing and have employees manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. So I'd be open to that if others want to open that can of worms. If not, I'm content to
Yeah, I just want to
stick
see
with
it
it.
being
But
in line if we can.
I've got Doug and Patty.
So I'm going to make a motion to try to give staff be
Great.
directed to, I guess, what is it, bring a bylaw back with the following ratios? To bring the bylaw back with the following ratios. First of all, port at 26.0, business and
Sorry.
other,
Sorry, that
That's
would be
the
a
rate.
rate for the port.
a rate, I beg your pardon, okay. So first is port at 26.0. Second, the ratio for class 6, which is business and other, remain at 2.80. And the ratio for light industry, which is class 5, remain at 3.82. And the ratio for class 7 forest managed go to 2.80. And if it's seconded, I'll speak to that.
That's seconded by Ted.
So my thinking, the port, I think we're past that issue. So business, as I said, I don't initially, I would leave it unchanged, which is what this motion does. I did, Councillor Spell's right, acquiesce as we started to go into changing some of these numbers and say I could live with that, until I saw the impact on residential. And these small changes actually have a significant shift onto residential, and I don't think we want to go that way. I'm not in favor of giving, I think the BC average is fine, it's close, we're close, and so I don't think it's necessary to change the business rate. The average increase of $600, having been a business owner and manager for many years, that's easily absorbed. You'll spend more in staff coffee, frankly. So I can live with that. The light industry rate, I don't see the need to change it. Actually, it's already below the BC average, and so I'm not sure I would want to think about bringing it down at all. If anything, I would raise it, except that I think that is something that's counterproductive to some of our economic development initiatives. And I think this is maybe the wrong time to start raising it. So even though the effect on the overall budget is minimal, I think to an individual business coming in, it might be a trend in the wrong direction for them. And so I just don't think it's necessary for us to go there. And the forest and manage one, I'll take staff's advice on that.
Okay, I've got Susan, Patty.
Thanks, I'm gonna be opposing this. I think that raising the residential rates for 3 lattes is a reasonable thing to do for our business climate. Even just to show businesses that we care and that we're bringing it down to the BC average is important. So I'm gonna be opposed to this.
Thank you. Patty?
Yeah, I still have some questions. Sorry.
All right.
That's what
Staff had said that one of the reasons we were keeping the light industrial rates and business rates close, that there was a rationalization with that. The BC average, however, does not reflect that rationalization. So,
It's true.
So I was just curious about why other municipalities are using the rationalization, obviously. And we're significantly lower in light industry, like significantly, almost half in terms of the rate. So that's why I thought we could move light industry up a bit. I'd like to move business down a bit, even if it's a little bit. Just, you know, I'm okay with the differential between light and business. So is the rest of the province. So, you know, and this, I just, you know, something council can consider too is we can amend the financial plan bylaw. That's one of my challenges with proving this so far ahead of getting the tax rate bylaw. So we really don't have an understanding when we approve a financial plan bylaw of the tax effect. So council can amend the financial plan bylaw.
Are you supporting the motion?
No.
No, okay, thanks. Anybody else want to comment? I'll just, I will support the motion on the floor. I think that leading light industry where it is important right now. I think we do want to attract more of the light industry manufacturing, and I want that ratio to be competitive. I think that one of the things that people are struggling with in terms of business is the cost of living here. And I think when we start impacting the residential zones so heavily, we're just sort of robbing from Peter and St. Paul. It's very, very difficult trying to keep residential rates low and therefore people being able to provide secondary suites at a reasonable rental rate because they can pay their property taxes and their mortgages. So it's a challenging juggle, and I think for me this creates the right balance for this year, which isn't to say that over time, if we see those folios declining, then we need to look at if we're supporting business sufficiently. So I will support the motion. Any other? We need to move on, so people have already commented. I want to go with people who haven't commented. Jason?
I know the mayor had made some suggestion about revising the financial plan. Just wondering how we might do that and what implications that might have. So that's a question for staff, I guess.
I guess there's a question buried.
Yeah.
Well,
I
we'd
know it's
have,
not what staff prefers. I totally understand why. I'm just wondering what are the mechanics and how would that look?
we would have to bring back the various things that we put in the financial plan. Council would have to give us a direction as to what we're amending. And then it would go back through the process. Ideally, you'd have some kind of public understanding of that, whether it's at least a little bit of time for them to react to it, because that was the premise under which we passed the first one. We went through significant public consultation process and surveys, and we need clear direction of what you'd like taken out, and hopefully we haven't already started it.
Do we have enough time?
You have till May 15th to get the bylaws through.
So do we have enough time?
We want to make the.
If you want to make it quick enough, yes. To your question, you might have to put some special meetings in, then you'd have to have a pretty definitive answer pretty quickly as to what you'd want to amend.
One more question, if I may. So can we go back to I want to know if we go to 2.7 on the business, what does that cost us? Like, what's the actual dollar figure that we're looking at in order to bring it to 2.7? Is that
Like
easy for you to
total?
calculate?
Yeah, we'd have to,
The effect of
The
2
ratio,
points.
so rather than, because in this model, it assumes that the slack gets picked up by the other classes, but let's assume that we cut the budget and with the idea of getting to 2.7, what is that number?
you need to go to the tax calc, to the actual amount being distributed. So we need to see how that number changes in terms of total tax revenue for class 6. So the 2018 column R, you need to change that so that we get all the same parameters in this.
So you want to know the effect of 0.1,
Take it to
the
2.7.
amount, the total amount dollar?
dollar,
It's
yeah.
175 grand.
I think what Jason's trying to figure out is how much would we have to cut the budget to essentially get a 2.7?
175 grand.
But it distributes, so it's not that pure, unfortunately,
Yeah.
right? Because every time, they're all relationed ratios, so we'd have to actually run the dollar value through. So we'd have to play with the bottom. If you play with the bottom number that we're bringing in, the 27, that's really where you need to play with the tax requisition need, right? You'd need to reduce the tax requisition need to see where it comes out.
Okay,
So
that means that-
233,000 is what you really need.
It's a big number.
It's a 1%
Yeah.
reduction.
So I'm going to support, actually no, I'm going to wait.
Okay, can I call the question on the motion?
So,
Wait, are you done or not?
no, I'm sorry. I'm a little slow, I got this cold today. So if we pass Councillor Race's motion, does that still allow us to go back and revise the financial plan? I guess is my question.
I think, well, the motion is to bring the bylaw forward for the tax rates, which would imply that we're not amending the financial plan. Because that's how it works. We budget and then we do this.
Yeah. It is actually law that the financial plan be passed first, but we've done that. If you amend it after, though, it's probably a little bit offside if we're amending it to affect the tax rates. There are times when you can amend a financial plan after the fact, but really they're expecting that you have the financial plan to drive the tax rate. And they do require us to pass one ahead of the other for that reason.
So basically, we would defeat this motion and we would delay this decision. We would have a motion put on the floor to revisit the financial plan. If that passes, then we could put a ratio motion back on the floor. If it doesn't pass, we would go this direction. If it does pass, we would not make this decision tonight.
Because
We're also in committee, so whatever we decide.
yeah,
is not-
so just to articulate where I'm going with this is that I'm leaning definitely towards just supporting the motion, and I want that sort of in place. But I do want to explore if there are a few options, maybe to revise the financial plan, and then with the sole purpose of getting that ratio down on the commercial. But you know, if we can't come to an agreement on that within a reasonable time, then I'd rather I want to just be able to move forward after that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Somewhat, but I might have to, there wouldn't really be a good point in bringing the tax bylaw forward then.
Okay.
Because really, we do use these numbers to help us make sure we've got the right rate and that we're collecting enough tax.
So would it then perhaps be appropriate, and I'm also looking at the mayor because she started this, if we deferred this decision to next week? Would that allow for enough time for us as a council to actually deliberate? Because I mean, to me, it's basically looking at the financial plan, looking at some non-essential stuff. Can we cut 200,000 out of it, or can't we? And can we agree on that or not? And then go from there. So
Okay, I'm
Trying
done.
to-
Susan, Ted,
I just wanted to point out that we're arguing about literally $20 over residential taxes. I just find it hilarious when the scale of numbers, you look at the scale of numbers, but you look at the impact spread over the amount of people, and it's very small. And it's whether you want to what you want to signal to the public. Do you want to support businesses? Are you worried about the number 4 versus the number 3, even though the percentage is very close? And it's $20 over residential tax rate. So when you're looking at supporting businesses, and I thought this was what our council wanted to do, I totally agree with the mayor, is that those tax ratios, by moving to the BC average and putting that onto a larger tax base, you're actually only raising residential taxes by 4 lattes. So like, really, to talk about this massive tax increase and you don't want to put it on the residential taxes, think about the scale that you're discussing versus the amount of businesses that need help in this community. So you're talking about the tea shop, and yes, I totally agree, Walmart and all that, but it's still, that's employment. And incentivizing employment is what we need to do. We clearly do not need to incentivize residential real estate. People are purchasing in our community, but like en masse, and we do not need to help them out. They're buying $1 million houses, and we're worrying about $20 on their tax rate. So, and it's like $7,000 or $8,000 versus for a small business owner, versus $20 for residents. So
an accurate number?
Where's that number come from?
Yeah.
2,134 versus 2,154.
So where's the $7,000 or $8,000 come from?
Okay, so through the
Business
chair,
taxes
Doug, through the
versus-
chair, through the chair. There's numbers being put out here. I'm just wondering if they're accurate.
I didn't
Because
follow
we
the
should be
last one,
debating
so-
facts. So
I'm sorry, I didn't follow the last one. I
can you
need
explain
clarification
that
as
number,
to what
please,
you're.
Councillor Chappelle?
So residential, I'm just looking at the average business taxes, 6,682. And 2,000.
No, she's looking at column G.
Exactly. 2,134. Go down.
Can you please put the ratios to what is the motion, which is 2.8, 26, 3.82, and 2.8? Okay, thank you. Now look at the numbers. Let's make sure we're...
6930. And then go back to the other.
So this is the motion on the floor.
Yeah.
So, and then this is what we're commenting on.
So-
Can you please move the business rates to?
So through the chair too, sometimes when you think about light industry, so yes, we can play with light industry if you want to increase that a little bit to try and bring business down. You will have, the skew will be fairly significant to get what you're hoping for. You also need to think about what your light industry is versus what other communities' light industry might be. I think a lot of our light industry is probably microbrewing and fairly small businesses still. But so that would be the only thing I'm going to toss on the table, and just make sure that we're not thinking that it's some light manufacturing company, because it's probably not here, and it might be in another
I
community.
just want to see the straight impact of leaving light industry,
Mhm.
business 2.7, which is a BC average.
Sure.
2.8.
Okay, 2.73,
And the same for forest.
for argument's sake.
Just-
Yeah, it doesn't, for
Leave-
argument's sake, let's put it the same as
Yeah.
forest, because it's really, forest is not, it is like a 0.01% blip in it. It doesn't really have any.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was only $10. One lot.
It's not the end of the world, it's still under the 5%. I
Right,
mean,
but
I
look at how it
have
affects
no, whatever
businesses.
council wants to do is.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. I'd like to vote on that motion. Ted, do you have any
Yeah.
last comments?
Okay.
It's $1,000 difference for business.
Well, I'm not-
$10.
Yeah. One thing is, when you have a business, you might have, let's say you have 6 employees and they all own houses. So their rate all goes up. And now they're stressed. I mean, and when you say
$10.
you say that the people that own houses are not stressed, you're way off there.
I'm not saying that at
Well,
all.
you did say that. But, and so.
Saying that $10 will not.
Okay,
The
okay, let
business-
Ted speak, because
the
everyone
business,
gave you an
uh,
opportunity to speak.
The business taxes are a write-off, and so you are kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I think if we talk about what Patty's saying about revising the financial plan or the financial way we do things, I don't think we're going to have time to do that. I do think what we'll get out of that, if we do, is we might be able to find a way to take Cleveland Avenue or take some of the smaller businesses that people feel might get hurt and put them in their own category or something. We also might be able to change the way we see our taxes where we get the number that everyone's paying before we have to go through all this process. But, you know, for a business, well, my question would be, for a business that pays $10,000 in taxes a year, what is their increase?
Okay, I'll go to Christine.
On that question, or what I was had my hand up for? Because I don't know
I
my
think there was
numbers.
a point of clarity that you wanted to make.
So
and then also on the
I just
question.
want to clarify, we had indicated to this council that if this tax rates came and it was unpalatable, that we could amend the financial plan, and I'm not withdrawing that. You could do that. You might need special meetings, and you might need to do that if that's what the weight of the room is. So I don't want to stand here now and say you don't have time. I never promised you that. I promised you that you had time. You do need to come up with $233,000 by the looks of it to make an impact. I think you struggled with that last time, but we will bring it back and you can tell us and direct us what would be coming out if that makes you comfortable. I do think that, sorry, I have one more point and it's losing my, I do agree that one of the biggest comments we're getting from businesses is that they're having a hard time keeping and getting employees because of housing. So I do think you need to think carefully about how much you want to lift your residential, because it is impacting your employers one way or another, good, bad. And by the same token, I'm not concerned about throwing business a bone for a bit of a ratio. I brought that forward as a staff recommendation. So I think the table's open, and there was one more comment I was going to make, and woo! But
What about the taxes on $10,000 or $10,000 you're paying a year tax? What's the increase?
942.
It's $1,000. Yeah, 9%.
there was another comment. I can't remember what else. Oh, thank you. That's exactly it. There is no way at this point to provide any kind of break to just a neighborhood. We would have to go into a whole different taxation scheme, and we are too late. So that is not an option. Even if you went back and amended your financial plan today, Cleveland is still going to get hit, folks, no matter what. You just can't bring that business rate down low enough that they're not going to be hit.
Okay, I'm going to go to Patty, and then I'm going to go to Doug before I call the question.
So these tax charge increases are based on 27.5 million, right? Can we
Yes.
do it, can we see those
Sure.
percentages of tax rate increases based if we reduce the financial plan by
With the lower financial plan, dollar values,
something like that?
So it was,
you'd remove that, yeah, you'd minus whatever, 1% of it or something.
if we move it to,
Maybe multiply it by 99%.
yeah.
And then you need to set your ratios back where you've got the boutique business and you
I
gotta
think
play
you
with your
have it
effective
still.
rate now, because you've got it at 2.7.
Leave it.
And the forestry, put forestry at 2.7. You want 7.3?
No, no, it's
2.7.
okay.
And then go down and just change your effective rate. That's probably somewhere close to 4. No, it's not even that high, it's not too bad.
So reduce.
If I may-
I can't see a thing.
Yeah, so maybe put it up to 3 point.
BC average is 2.73, and that 0.3 is significant.
Yeah,
Am I getting this right?
I thought it was at
It's
BC
because we
average.
just cut the amount of
So
taxation
maybe
we
we go
need,
to
so it's gonna go up just a
2.73.
little bit.
Yeah.
We just gotta clear the 42
Can
grand
we do
rate.
2.73?
So I need to reduce the 3.0.
I think we did do 2.73.
No, it
Can you
says
go back?
2.7.
Yeah,
2.73.
To reduce.
Change it.
No,
2.7.
the yellows, the 2 yellows on the left. Can you
I
put?
can't see. It's too far.
Okay, so row 13 and 14.
Is it on your screen?
It's not on our
It's
screen.
not on my screen.
So right there, can you punch in 2.73? And here, 2.73. Okay, and then we need to just,
Oh, you said put 5 in there, not, oh,
can you just retype that? Oops, sorry, just a second, not on it. There we go. Okay. Now, this has to be at 26. Can you put that at 26, please? Okay, and then, so we need to go to 3 point, can you just play with that? Maybe give me 3.5.
That increases.
What is that one?
Oh, sorry, yeah, it's going down, sorry. 2.77, let's take it back to where it was before. And 2.73. Oh, gotta go bigger, sorry, 2.5-ish. Sorry, it's not a perfect model. And 2.55 maybe. Okay, getting pretty close now. So 2.55, and then if you take us over to the analysis screens, can you see? So here's
So can you please explain what you changed?
Sure. So we took the business average down to 2.73. We took the farm to 2.73. We put the port at 26. We came up with the new effective rate of 2.55, was it?
Yeah, 5.4.
And now this is your average, your impacts on all your average business. So, and then that assumes that you just cut your taxes by 1%, or your tax revenue requirement by 1%.
Oh,
So you took $276,000 out of your current budget.
Okay,
it's
and
looking great until that point.
Yeah.
But look at the tax rate, 2,125 from 2,134. It's like you're cutting services now for $10, and we're going through all this work for $10.
so what I want to do before I call the question,
Look at the business rate. If you cut it,
Yeah,
it's down to 393 instead of 900.
I know.
so
Or
let's,
600.
It's significantly,
It was 600
but why not just drop it 1% for $10?
okay, so let's try and get back
Instead of going
to,
back to the budget.
I want to go back to the person who made the motion, which is you.
See, nobody knows.
And if we take out the tax cut, so we leave the financial plan alone, would you be open to amending the business rate to 2.73 versus 2.8?
And everything else stays the same? The 26 and the...
Yes.
Everything else stays the same.
Is this the same?
Sure.
Me too.
And the seconder okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, so without amending the financial plan, may we see the impact of 2.73?
It's Russian roulette.
And everything else being the same, forestry and everything?
26 for the port, light industrial stays the same, and the forestry goes same as light. 2.70.
Okay, so you got to go to the master first, right? Because you got to fix it. I assume you're reading the
Almost.
master.
$1,000 for
Okay,
small
you
No,
guys,
business.
let's not talk across the table. I just want to get this done.
So
26 for the port.
2.73 and 2.73 for the forestry, bottom one. So it's
I think
it's reading a
forestry is
separate
staying the
table?
same. Doug said everything else is the same.
No, I
Well,
believe
no,
he said.
Forest has always seemed to go with business and it has no impact, so
Okay,
they just sort of
fine.
followed that philosophy.
Okay, impact. Okay, so this,
What did Forrest go to?
2.73.
2.73. Okay, this is the
Amended.
amended motion, so can we vote on the amendment? Is that how we do this?
We'll vote on the amendment.
You have to vote
Well,
on the
it's-
amendment.
It's a friendly amendment.
It's a friendly amendment because you made it.
So
So this
it's
is
a
the
motion.
motion on the floor, and this is the impact. Can I, Jason?
I'll just comment.
Yes.
So I'm going to vote against the amendment. I don't support, while I do support the goal of reducing the commercial tax rate to deal with the really rapid increase in assessment, I don't think that we should be doing it by shifting it to residential, so I'm going to vote against it.
Could I just find out now, so now if you had a $10,000 tax bill, it's 738
38.
instead of 900.
It's the rate.
So on
It's
10,000,
based on the rate.
so
No, it's only $10,000. It doesn't show up there.
Yeah, we'd have to take the rate. So it's the business rate that you're
Yeah,
looking for?
yeah. So
So,
before the business rate, if I was paying $10,000, my increase was 900.
yeah, so if you do a
What's
quick and
my
dirty on
increase
the 8.6% tax rate, so if you just
Went
take
back-
up G,
Just go to the previous slide.
G9. Okay,
Getting too many directions.
Right.
okay, so
You know, just to Susan's point about the 2 cups
if
of
you take
coffee.
$1 million, divide
small
by
business,
1,000,
it's gonna
and
be 4
multiply
cups
it
of
by
coffee.
G,
The big business is gonna be a parking.
Four kegs.
G9.
Yeah, before kegs.
G9, sorry, not J.
Coffees.
French person.
No,
I know, I'm interested to
Yeah, I
see.
think you had it, when it shows on the revised, on the previous slide, it shows now the business increase. The 7.46
Okay,
versus
on
9
the,
point.
is that what
whatever.
we're trying to?
Well, on
get to?
$10,000, it's just
Those are just-
$746.
Those are just averages. He asked on the million though.
No, $10,000.
10,000.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Taxable.
10,000 is a medium size.
Sorry.
Small size. business.
So take some zeros off that one.
So somebody that has a small warehouse in the business park pays $200 less. I bet every house in town pays $10 more. Walmart pays $4,000 less, and the coffee shop downtown pays $60 less. 6 cups of coffee. 10, you know, whatever.
We could minimize every decision.
Well, I'm just
Yeah.
trying, I mean,
Let's not minimize
that's
it
what
to
I
cups
have
of
trouble
coffee.
with.
Yeah.
So people are dealing with real things here.
That's what I'm saying.
People are struggling, and we
Yeah.
can't say it's a couple
That's
cups
right.
of coffee. Every dollar matters in so many households.
But to Susan's point, she keeps bringing up the 2 cups of coffee per house. And I'm saying to the little business, that's, that's 10 customers coming in, difference.
So, I'm going to vote against this motion. I don't think we should be increasing and putting, I think we're still competitive in the market. I think our tax rates are fair. I think that there are thousands of households struggling with expenses, and so I think we need to try and balance it. So I was happy with the 2.8. That's where I'd like to leave it. So I will not support this motion.
I'm with Karen.
So
Any
we're
other
voting on the
comments?
amendment.
We're voting on the
No, it was a friendly amendment, so we're voting on the main motion.
the main motion. Can I call the question?
I'd like to speak to the new motion, please. Thank you. I think this is a good amendment. I think this brings us a little bit more in line with it brings us to the BC average for businesses, which is what the business community will be looking for. It is it's the exact same thing for small businesses. To think that small businesses are drastically struggling in this community is a completely incorrect way to think about things. We want to incentivize businesses. It's shocking when you get a 9% increase as a small business, and this will make it a little bit less of a burden. And I really do think that moving from, like 2,134 to 148 is a negligible difference across the residential tax sector as opposed to the impact that it brings to small business. And it even just recognizes that you're bringing us in line to, if businesses want to come up here and they want to be in line, if they look at the tax rate and it's above, even though it's just a ratio and a number, when you say that the tax rate is above in a place that they struggle to even find brick and mortar to move into, it's significant for small businesses, so I'll be supporting this amendment, and I appreciate as well.
There's no only one.
Yeah, sorry, not the amendment, the one motion. And I also want to say I really appreciate the flexibility and the compromise that council has brought into these tax ratios, because it is significant to small business. I can speak from experience.
Yeah. So, just
Briefly, Ted, I want to call the question.
with the residential, don't forget, the residential utilities have all gone,
Not this year.
yeah, they have.
Not this year.
Garbage cans have gone
The
up.
utilities we managed to
Utilities.
stabilize pretty
It was
well.
0 for sewer, 2 for water, and whatever,
Garbage
every year out was.
But
only
business is
4.
moving to
2.71,
zero
I think,
waste, which is
for
going to be
average
expensive.
tank.
Okay,
Anyway, I'm okay with the original motion. I'm not going to support this.
I'll call the
So,
question.
on the process, to be honest, I think an amendment should have been put forward. It's a fundamental change to the original motion, so I think people should have a right to vote on an amendment to the original motion. It's not a friendly amendment.
Is it
Make that
amendment or is it
substantive.
a friendly motion?
Someone can state their opinion. If somebody's against a friendly amendment, then you have to vote on it. Even if the mover and the
And
seconder
we've
were
already had a couple people
were,
speak against the friendly amendment.
in favor of it, if somebody wants to make it a real motion, then that's. the
So
way
it is
has
an
to be.
amendment
Then it
then?
has to be an amendment.
Okay, so this is on the amendment.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarity.
So you have to have a
Seconded
mover and
for amendment.
seconder for the
So we
amendment.
don't have a mover and a seconder on the amendment.
So we're back to the original motion.
No,
It was-
I just need someone to
You just need
move
to
the
change the
amendment.
procedure.
So-
Is anyone going to move the amendment? Moved by Susan, seconded by
The amendment is to go to 2.73.
Moved by Susan, seconded by Patty. So on the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed? Councilors Kent, Elliott, Black and Wolf, Race, and Pryor opposed. On the original motion, which is leaving business at 2.8, moving the port to 26, light industry stays at 3.82, and farm matches business at 2.8. All those in favor? Opposed? Blackman, Wolf, Chappelle, Heinzman opposed.
Okay,
Carries.
thank you.
Motion carries.
Only gets us to the tax.
Let's take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
The reporter should have been.
So we're back in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. So the next one, the Fourth Property Tax Act, we received a letter from Mayor Bain in Port Rupert asking us to look at supporting their efforts to get the province to lift the port property tax restrictions. So staff have brought forward a bit of context to help council decide how we want to support or not support Prince Rupert in this effort. So I'll turn it back to staff.
Thank you, Councillor Chair Elliott. This is Christine Mathews, CFO, and just going to talk to you a little bit about the Ports Property Tax Act and the request for repeal. Obviously, Prince Rupert has sent along some literature that is very compelling and has several valid points, which we'll discuss. And we do obviously like to support our fellow municipalities, but it is important on this particular scenario that we really consider about Squamish's experience and that we not lose sight of that, please. So, was that the first slide? Are you moving? I'll jump.
Okay.
Okay. So, really, what we're here today, what Mayor Baines has requested is that we essentially join them in a joint document for mayors to sign, supporting their pitch is to repeal the act. Council resolution to sign off on that joint document, and that financial staff be dispatched to assist with the technical document. So what we're going to do is we're just going to review some of the pros and cons of the proposed Ports Property Tax Act. And so we'll start from there with what I hope is just factual information. As you're going through some of this literature I'm going to give to you, I would like you to ponder a couple key questions. Obviously, I think an important one for us is what is the economic importance of a major industry in our community? What ratio to residential, business, and light industry is appropriate? We had a very fulsome discussion about some of that just a few minutes ago. What is the value of the province sharing in this ports tax payment and basically contributing to our economic development? And when does a method of assessment, when does the method of assessment on Class 4 restrict tax revenue enough to outweigh some of the benefits that come with the Act? So those are just some things to ponder as you go through here. So basically we tried to put a couple pros and cons together. Really important at first, and to Prince Rupert's point, there is a couple things you need to understand about how the Ports Property Tax Act and how the assessment for the port is done. So first off, the land value is prescribed under regulation, and every year it increases by the CPI rate of July over a 1-year average, and it's the BC CPI rate. So effectively, the land is always moving up. Granted, the important reason I put it on the pro-repeal side is that obviously tax rates often move more than CPI, and so we're kind of restricting that land value increase to something lower than some of our other classes experience. Second thing to understand is that all Class 4 property, regardless of port or any other major industry, their improvements are legally valued based on cost and then depreciated at a percentage per year until it reaches 80% of the asset. The percentage per year is prescribed under regulation, and for the port, that's 5%. Those percents range anywhere, depending on the industry, from 2.65 up to 6.5, I believe it is. So it really changes depending on the major industry.
Question there?
Just on that point, so does that mean it goes from 100% to 80%, or does it go from 100% to 20%? if you're going down 5% here till you get to 80%.
It's still
of assets,
80% of it depreciated.
So down to 20%
20%.
value.
Yeah. So it is substantial and definitely something for council to consider. Because what's going to happen with the port now, as I mentioned to you earlier, is that you might start to see declining, and that's why next year we'll want to move their tax rate up some more, and that's why I like that you've left a little bit of room between 26 and 27.5 so that we can sort of offset some of that depreciation next year. It's also important, obviously, that's on the pro-repeal side, because of course, if we cap the tax rate, there comes a point where we hit 27.5, and now, yeah, legitimately, their taxes are probably going down unless they make more improvements on the port. Okay. The other thing is, the other argument in the letter from Prince Rupert was that taxpayers are picking this up through the provincial revenues that are used for the grant portion that they provide us as additional compensation for the fact that they're restricting our rate. Okay. On the con side, or why staff, frankly, is going to recommend that you don't support a repeal, that, like it or not, the province currently pays $417,000 in 2017 to, as a grant to cover that tax rate loss. So on top of whatever we get from the port, we get an additional $417,000, and that will increase by another CPI factor this year. I'm estimating it'll be about $422,000 going into 2018. Already, your port is a much higher burden than your other businesses and light industry. Tax plus the BC grant is $993,000 that this one industry brings to your tax base. The equivalent tax rate is about 42. So that's a pretty significant tax rate when you consider that we're concerned about 8 for business, or 8 or 9 for business. 42 is essentially what the port would have to provide to make up the difference if this tax act was repealed. The class 4 BC average rate is 32, so you can see that that rate is way over any other average BC industry. And the estimated ratio is 13.2 when we consider the grant. So again, fairly significant, 4.7 times the DOS business rate and ratio.
Again, in this equivalent tax rate of 42, what does that mean?
Basically, if I had to grab the same amount of revenue from the port that we grab from the port's tax plus the grant, we would have to increase the rate in the model to 42 from 27, or from the 25.5 it is now. We'd have to raise it up to 42 to bring home the same revenue. So if there was no tax act, the port would have to make up that difference, or we would have to take a hit in our revenue that we bring in. It's the mill rate, yes, is what I'm talking about. The provincial taxation spread over a wider tax base. So, you know, there was some concerns that the taxpayer has to pay through the province anyway, and then it gets contributed back to this municipality. However, the beauty of that is that we're actually spreading that grant over the entire province, not just our municipality, whereas if we're making up that difference within this municipality, we're either hitting us or the port to do it, right? So, and the port contributes 1.6 million to BC taxes every year. So they're pretty well paying for that grant themselves. And then it allows a difference, and this is the key one I want council to remember. This act is what allows us to assess the port differently than any major industry that comes down the pipe next. I'm just going to leave that thought with you. Because strategically, this might not be the right time for us to repeal this act.
Can I ask a question on that? So we, last year, as the mayor said, we set a different category for major industry. So that we'd have a port, and then we'd have a major industry line.
It's this act that allows us to have 2 different values for class 4. If this act is gone, we don't have that right. We have to tax the port the same as any future major industry.
Right.
Okay?
Okay. Patty and then Ted.
So I think there are lots of solutions. I agree that there's just repealing the act without having some sort of mechanisms in there to, first of all, ensure
Can I
that
just stop you there? Are you done your presentation?
Not quite.
Okay, do
but
you have a question about this slide? So,
No.
Okay, do you have a question?
I can wait.
You can wait. Sorry, Patty, I just want to
No,
get all the
I
facts
thought we
and
were
then.
done. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So this was the graph that we saw before, because again, if you see Mayor Bain's experience and Prince Rupert, you can see that they actually had a pretty significant decline in their taxation. So I can understand why they're concerned about it. The only thing I'll point out is, please note also that when it shows the comparison between the growth and when they show the comparison against the port and other classes in figure 2, note that they're not taking into account growth. So again, the port industry is really, there's been no growth in that class, but if they're anything like us, our residential classes have gone up, so we're getting a lot of growth. So you just have to be careful again when you look statistically at information that you're comparing apples to apples, because yes, they might be bringing in more tax revenue residential, but it also could be that you have that much more residential that year. So we always want to be careful how we look at stats. That aside, I don't argue Prince Rupert's experience, but I do think council needs to look at our experience. But very important to note, after 2018, we will start to see a little bit more of what Prince Rupert saw, because we will start to see their depreciation on their improvements. And so we could probably cushion that for the next 3 to 4 years by increasing that rate up and trying to keep them in line with, you know, some kind of increase that the rest of the tax base is doing. That's potential, but it is true that at the end of that, when we hit 27.5, we're going to start to experience what Prince Rupert is. We're just not there yet. So that's, I think, a key point. And again, not necessarily disputing anything Prince Rupert says, but strategically, I think Squamish needs to consider what makes sense for Squamish. So this is the decision requested by Prince Rupert. Would council like to participate in the movement to repeal the Ports Property Tax Act, or otherwise request a change in the related provincial assistance? If so, does the district have edits or collective joint document? Have any edits for the collective joint document? Would you like to come back with what we'd like to see that document change to? And if so, also, is DOS prepared to commit financial staff resources to preparing a joint technical document? That's it in a nutshell.
All right, thanks. So now I've got Patty and Ted.
Yeah, can you go back to the pros and cons, please?
The which one? I'm sorry.
The pros and
Pros
cons.
and cons.
Sure.
So, a couple things. I actually think we should support Prince Rupert in this, and I'm a little bit getting mixed messages, Christine, in that last 3 years we've been talking about how, and it changed last year with the move the tax rate down, but we were at the cap, and that continually pushed the burden onto other classes because we couldn't go anywhere with that. So I'm a little bit surprised by, and it sounds like, well, I won't go there yet. So yes, if I think we should ask them to remove it, and we may not change our port tax rate. And I think part of that request is breaking out the assessments, you know, putting another class in there for port from the provincial side of things, because I would like to be able to differentiate between those types of big classes, and not just have one heavy industrial. I mean, Prince Rupert has a massive problem, massive problem, because they're basically 80% of the town is ports, and so every year they're basically going down in revenue massively, significantly, and it just burdens all the other business. So they're desperate with this type of thing. We don't have to increase our rate. In conversations with the mayor of North Vancouver, they're like, we're going to support Prince Rupert, but we're not going to change our rate. We're not going to jump our rate up to 42. But I do think we need to be able to break out heavy industry from port. So that would be part of the request, perhaps through Prince Rupert and others, that we ask. I think there's a whole bunch of how the province assesses properties. It'll be interesting to see if they're going to add another class for rental with their rental zoning, whether they're going to have another class for rental zoning. Maybe they're thinking about completely redoing those things. But doesn't mean we have to up the rate. It just means we have that flexibility to go up and down just a little bit in order to make sure we're not just continually over time burdening our residential and our business classes because we have a ceiling on this. As the Prince Rupert letter outlined, when this was first brought in 2004, it was supposed to It was supposed to stop in 2014 originally, and then in 2007 or 2009, they extended it to 2018, and then in 2014, they just said, oh, we don't have a deadline anymore, taking it off. So it was just a slow death by 1,000 cuts to make it permanent. It was never intended to be permanent. So I'd suggest we actually join Prince Rupert, but we do have to create, and I don't want to unduly burden the port either, appreciate that. And there needs to be a system whereby if the provincial government wants to not unduly burden the port, then maybe they should figure out how they subsidize the port instead of just putting a tax cap on this rate, which really takes the flexibility out of municipalities' hands to do things on an individual basis. And Prince Rupert is just an extreme example of that. And maybe we're going to be a small example of that in the next year or two once we get that ceiling.
Can you talk a bit about how you see that, the grant we currently get from the province? Like how would we wean us in the port off that to make up the difference? Like, so we don't have that huge jump to a 42-to-1 ratio or rate.
Well, we could,
This is $417,000.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering how you see that in the letter. How would we ask?
Well, I think what staff are trying to articulate here is this is a big hit to the port, and I get that.
And us
potentially.
if the grant's gone.
Well, we would, but yes, we would not change the revenue we get for ports. So yes, we would jump up, absolutely. And I think what you're trying to say is here, that jump up would affect the port by $700,000 a year. Totally get that too. So no, it would, the math works out that way. So the province wants to still, essentially the province is subsidizing the port by giving us the grant. The province wants to subsidize the port through another tax break or mechanism somewhere else, they can make up that difference. So that's what I'm saying, they make up the difference, we still get the same revenue as we always got.
Okay, Ted?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I see it a little bit different, but the depreciation is one of the big things. And that's what Prince Rupert's having trouble with. You know, our buildings down there, for example, have been there 30 years. So at 5% a year, they're worth nothing. They might go on for another 20 years. So the depreciation number, we have to be able to have some control over that.
So you agree with me?
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm just saying the depreciation is the big one. I mean, we got the advantage that there was our fire, so at least we got something new down there to depreciate from. But the province gives the port a grant, or gives us a grant, but the port can still contribute 1.6 million. Is that to us?
That's to the province.
To the province. So see, it's basically a bit of a download. The province takes 1.6, they give us 4, and then, you know, so if we didn't have this set up in there, I'm sure there's room where we could come out ahead and have more control over this depreciation thing.
And that's why the cap needs to be there.
Yeah, that's right. So I would support certainly some kind of negotiations. I mean, I don't think the port should have to pay any more, but the province is getting a few bucks out of these guys at our expense. So I support negotiation.
Yeah, I kind of have a foot in either camp, I guess, because to me the critical thing is the grant and what happens to it. And so just to say repeal the act without figuring out where the additional revenue is coming from is just plain shooting yourself in the foot. And if we don't want to get in the position of having to raise our rate for the port with nothing else happening, because that obviously doesn't help the port business at all. We're going to be facing depreciation on that $12 million improvement for the next 20 years, I guess, whatever that 5% works out to. So that's, from my understanding, what happened with the pulp mills. As they depreciated, the mill rate went up to compensate that until you ended up with numbers like 20 times the residential rate and stuff like that, and they all started screaming. So that's the thing I think the province is trying to protect, but to say we support it by itself, for me, doesn't work. I would say we support it on the condition that the province makes other arrangements with respect to the grant. They either give them some kind of a deduction on their provincial tax rate, or they continue the grant or something. But we can't just willy-nilly pull that thing away and that's it. I'm almost a little hesitant to get too far into this because we're probably in the near future going to be talking with Woodfibre, LNG, about the tax agreement, and I would have to expect that part of it will be around, part of their operations will be port related, but I don't know that, and so, and part of it just heavy industry, and I'm sort of guessing there, but this will perhaps in part impact that as well. So it's just, I'll wait and see.
Well, on
I'll
Woodfibre.
speak it.
Yeah, well, on Woodfibre, you know, at least Woodfibre, when they pay us money, really, we don't give them anything. You know, we're gonna get
Different
tax-
issues.
We're gonna get a tax from them.
I think for me, I'd certainly acknowledge that Prince Rupert has a major issue here. And I wish that the letter had said modernize the Port Property Tax Act rather than repeal. Because I think that it was created in 2004 to solve a very specific problem related to our forestry industry. And I think a lot has changed, but perhaps not our desire to make sure that our ports are viable and competitive in the international markets. And they're really important to our economy. So there's things that I don't want to lose, like the ability to distinguish between the port and other heavy industry. Like, I think that's really important to keep in the Act. I think that there should be more flexibility in the Act so that Prince Rupert could move a little bit differently than Squamish, because we're different communities with different industries, different issues. The Act basically treats us as all the same, but we're different than the North Shore and Delta and Prince Rupert. We all have varying levels of port activity and different residential influences and other industry influences. So for me, the ask to the province is to modernize it. They don't want to get rid of it. I'm not sure we want to get rid of the whole thing, including the piece around the grant, or at least grandfather it so that everyone gets a chance to get used to it. But just to pull it without having a plan makes me really nervous. Patty?
Yeah, and I don't even think Prince Rupert's suggesting that. And I'm not sure the grant is actually written into the Act, because the grant is ending this year, but the Act is continuing. So it'd be interesting if they don't actually intend to follow through with the grant. The last discussion.
It says notice to repeal. That's what the letter says.
Yes, and I agree. We're not talking about repealing without replacing it with something that makes no sense. Modernize, you can use whatever word you want to use. I'm happy to use modernize. And maybe that's a way to sell it to the province too. But I think it should be changed. I think it should be modernized, amended, adapted, whatever. I like the idea of giving it that, articulating in that local flexibility context. I don't know how that really looks, other than you'd be able to make decisions within a parameter based on where you are. But we could articulate that. And obviously we don't want to negatively impact the ports. This isn't about negatively impacting the ports. This is about ensuring we have that wiggle room to adjust to local flexibility issues. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think the cap should come on. But we can't unduly burden our tax base. We can't unduly burden the port's ability to pay these things. And I think every port, like our port, has different financial challenges than Prince Rupert Port's are doing really, really well, but the city's not seeing any of that. And I think we do have to support other local governments in this. We can create our own rules locally to make sure we're being fair locally, but I can imagine if there was a law that was burdening our taxpayers, the amount that Prince Rupert is being burdened by this particular tax policy, we'd be pretty upset. So I'd like to see us, and I'm happy to use language like modernize to allow for local flexibility and make some suggestions in there in terms of ensuring that ports aren't unduly financially affected. And it's more like a tax shift more than anything. But take the cap off, allow us to do 2 streams of assessment, heavy industry and port, and then ensure that whatever tax, the province has modified their tax regime to ensure that essentially the amount of the grant that's coming to us is essentially going to the ports.
So, council, I guess the decision is the direction on the letter, as well. So it's either to repeal or to request changes. Then we would have to, like through the mayor, agree on some edits for a collective joint document, and then do we have the staff time to actually support a technical document? Staff, do we have capacity?
Well, through the chair, not a ton of capacity right now while we're doing TTP, but this is a pretty significant issue, and I don't think we don't want a voice at the table as they amend this, because I think it has significant implications to us if they were to only look at Prince Rupert's scenario.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the mayor's comments. I think actually when you look at Squamish, we have bigger problems with the assessment than the port, and we just went through a long discussion about it. And so really, I think we'd be asking the province to not only modernize that, but just maybe just kind of have a look at the whole assessment picture. In the types of things we were talking about, the commercial assessment, this is kind of part and parcel of it, but I think it's a bigger thing than just the port issue that we'd want them to look at. If we want to write the letter just about the port, I get that, but I think the other thing we can start to do is chat up people at various conferences, pressuring the province to look at these things. And as you pointed out, the issue we're having in Cleveland Avenue is a BC-wide issue. Why not push for that change as well? When we're trying to get them to change how things are assessed and so forth, this is, to me, is related to that. Or vice versa.
Ted and then Susan.
Yeah. Well, I agree with the revised comments that you had, Karen. Because we wouldn't know what would happen with the grant, we wouldn't know what would happen. So, but to port, what do you call it there? I mean, it is a real problem for them. I mean, I would like to support them. I'd like to get some wording in, as has been mentioned here, and like staff says, we have to be at the table on that. I wouldn't want to confuse it with all the other issues with our zoning, because there's a new government in right now, and they're just flat out on all their stuff, and that might be the 5-year fix, but I think the port should be in helping our neighbor. We should get on the ball with them, get to the table, and revise this. Because even if it's pulled, then something has to be revised, right? So.
Okay, thank you. I've got Susan and Peter.
Thanks. I agree with most of the comments that have been said, the mayor's comments in particular about the language that's used. I do think that as far as assessment, I wonder, and I think this is more of a conversation because I'm not sure how it would impact everything, but moving to a land-based residential assessment as opposed to a house-based residential assessment. There's a lot of talk about this in the Lower Mainland, as far as residential tax is concerned, basing it on residential land as opposed to, like, depending on the zoning class, as opposed to the structure that's on the land, and trying to measure improvements and update assessments based on improvements as opposed to based on what the land value is based on. And there's quite a few, I can't name them offhand, I'm just trying to think. I know Vancouver for sure. There's councillors that are running on that platform.
Can you stick to the port property tax?
Yep, I've already said it.
Okay. Good, Peter.
I'm in favor of supporting Christopher on this, but I'm not in favor of a wholesale endorsement of the repeal. I like some of the points Patty brought up. And I do take Ms. Mathews' point that over time we're going to see changes in depreciation at our own port, so I think it's important to get to the table and get out ahead of it and get some of those, I think, modernized or modified or whatever you want to call it, but we need to make some changes.
Okay. How do you do it?
I'm trying to formulate a motion, and maybe I'll just read what I have, and then council can comment. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think for me the big concern is that the letter right now says reinstating the sunset clause for the act. And I don't agree with that. I think we need to modernize the act, but I think
It's not, I'm not addressing that. So the recommended motion is that council support modernization of the Port Tax Act to allow for local flexibility and ensure community resilience by one, well, I guess there's only one, I put it all into one, because I haven't broken it down to two. Repeal the cap and replace with a formula that allows municipalities to determine local tax rate. That the changes in reports are not unfairly impacted financially, i.e. provincial grants are essentially transferred. And that creates a separate tax class for port and other heavy industrial activities. And that's as far as I got.
so then when you bring back a draft for council to look at, with the changes?
I'm open to suggestions. So essentially, take the cap off so we can have local flexibility. Ensure that the ports aren't being, like, we're not just stealing from Peter to pay for Paul or whatever the saying goes. Essentially, the ports aren't impacted that difference in the granting. That essentially the grant from the province, instead of coming to us, would go to them. We would change our rates, I mean, locally. But essentially, the impact to the provincial government wouldn't be any different because they're paying the grant anyway, and the impact to the port wouldn't be any different. The only difference is that we have some flexibility in the rate. That's the intent of this, and if I'm not achieving that through the motion, then let me know.
All right, so that's the motion. Are you seconding or do you have?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay.
And my comment was, I think at this stage it's fine because this, of course, would have to come to council for confirmation, and at that time we could look at the draft of the letter before we finally say yes or no.
How about we add that to the motion, and that a mayor be drafted for council to
But a
consider.
mayor be drafted?
That
Or a
letter,
letter.
you do that too, that a letter be drafted
For review by
for
council.
review by council, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is committee, so
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I'll send that. Thank you.
So Chair, I know you wanted to end at 12:15. We could, unless there's any like quick and dirty comments on financial plan process debrief, we can skip by this if you'd like. Or if there's any like one or two comments, we can do that. The
You know
only
what,
other thing
why
we're
don't we
going to
save
do.
the financial process debrief till we actually have finished everything?
Sounds good. Okay. So I'll just, I know that there was a request from a councillor for the accumulated surplus position update, so I will provide that. I'll go through that very quickly and just clarify. I know there's a lot of numbers up on that screen, so and I don't have any definitive new recommendations from where we were at before. I think our working capital is fairly close to where it needs to be right now. So let me talk you through what this is telling you. The accumulated surplus coming into 2017 and now updated and corrected is basically 8.9, which is what we had disclosed to you previously. It's pretty well on mark with what we had previously told you, but this is how it breaks down to all the funds. In 2017, we have an estimated surplus value of about 3.492. This results in a net accumulated surplus of about 12.4. So against that value currently, as of today, we are internally borrowing for capital purposes to the tune of $4.8 million, almost 4.9, I guess if you round up. And we also have a change in accounting policy which has a long-term receivable related to debt that frankly is not available for cash operational use until the debt expires. So I'm sort of saying that that doesn't make for working capital. That brings us down to our operating working capital being at about 7.14 across all the reserves. As you can see, solid waste after that is starting to look a little uncomfortable. So essentially, it is borrowing from the general fund right now. We have a prescribed target for working capital through our long-term financial plan, and that is based on 1/8 of the operating expenses. And that comes from the American Water and Wastewater recommendations, that's a viable and useful dollar value. When you look at that, our 1/8 would be about $6 million of operating value, working capital operating value. So it just depends whether you want to include capital or not. That's what the blue suggests that it's exceeding everything, including capital and everything. We're exceeding our working capital right now. But if you really look at it in terms of the operating, if it was really intended to be operating, which I think by the basis it was intended to be operating capital, working capital, then we're sitting just about 1.1 million above. And you can see that the general fund is not quite where it's supposed to be. So I just wanted to come back. At this point, I'm not proposing any real massive changes. Council does support both capital and operating using accumulated surpluses from time to time to also smooth tax rates. So on top of the month-over-month cash requirements that we have, we also like to draw down on accumulated surplus to stabilize our rates. And on top of that, from January to May, we essentially go in the hole for about $3 million of cash use per month until we start bringing in taxes in June and July. So we definitely exercise the use of that operating capital significantly for half of the year, making sure that we have enough cash, that we're not inadvertently tapping into reserve balances and having them not have the returns they're supposed to be having when they're held in reserves.
Yeah, and I was one of the people that requested this information, and it's a bigger discussion than we'll have today, but I think my goal was to perhaps get a policy together that might hopefully guide future councils about and staff about what we might do with the surplus part, the bottom yellow line. I take the recommendation about the top numbers, and we do need working capital. I understand that. And so we might consider, and I wasn't thinking about dropping the operating budget because we get to a level of taxation and we don't want to go down because then it can spike up again, and I understand that. But whether we use it for more capital-oriented projects instead of borrowing and things like that. My concern is that it just sits there and it's kind of dead money, for lack of a better term, yet it's money we've taxed for. And so I think we should have some purpose for that money. So bigger discussion, but that was kind of where I was coming from with that. But thanks for the information.
And I think from order of magnitude, the dead money is about 1 million. It's not to alarm anyone. We do actually keep that in investments and things to try and make sure
I know it earns interest, but it's doing things in the municipalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is a policy around that accumulated surplus? Do other municipalities have those in terms of how to use any excess? Or?
To be honest, it varies, and often it's not spoken to specifically, but we do have our long-term financial plan, and it is based on 1/8 of operating. The key is, it doesn't mean, because right now we leverage our working capital to also do internal borrowing, as you can see, to the tune of 4.8 million on capital. So over and above our operating needs, we're also tapping into our capital needs for that. So it just depends what they really intended for with the 1/8 working capital. If it's just on the amount available for operating, then I think the bottom yellow line is really where we're at on 1/8 on our proposed or financial plan target. So we're a little over our financial plan target right now. As you can see, though, it's in the water and sewer area, so we don't like to move funds. So it might make sense to move water and sewer into capital next year as we look at the 2019 financial plan. But right now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do general and surplus and solid waste until we get back to our target.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Good. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that update. Motion to terminate. Moved by Ted, seconded by Patty. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.